That I think is probably one of the largest casualties in the last few years, right? And the other one now that starts to happen is, because, especially one particular side is so very good at utilizing government in itself as a weapon, right? The process is the punishment, right? That now is sort of converted over into pretty much everything, where it's like, okay, we found out that, X, Y, and Z person is going to be charged. And it's like guaranteed within 6 months, you will find out that the same group of people that are like, yes, charge them for that, are doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even the first time I've heard it now. It's actually come across a number of times. So let's actually just get started. I'm gonna use that as our intro because I think it's a really good way to start this conversation.
Well, I think that leads into what you were talking about, we were chatting about earlier before the show, which is that concept of, what exactly are we doing as far as our rights and responsibilities, and how does that carry into being able to use firearms and then gun culture in of itself?
Yeah. Well, let's just get started then. Beau, this is not the first time you've been on the show, but this is the first time we actually get to shoot from inside the range that you guys run out of. So, just go ahead and introduce yourself. Let's go straight into the conversation. Everyone knows who they're listening to by now, and I'd really like to hear more about it. But just jump right in, man.
My name is Beau Doboszenski. I'm the owner, lead instructor of Defensive Mindset Training. We're actually inside of Range Systems demo range facility. We're here in Minnesota. And it's really good to be with you again. It's been such a long time since I've been able to sit down face to face. I mean, we've done some phone calls and stuff over the years, which has been always really great. I'm professional firearms instructor. I've been doing it now since a little before 2010, 2008, 2009 ballpark. And this is all I do for a living, is teach firearms. We teach obviously in a kind of a different way. We do more regular weekly training and stuff like that. So I'm seeing my clients once a week, once every other week for years and years and years. Mm-hmm. You worked with us back in the sealed mindset days, doing the same kind of training and development system.
Yeah, I got introduced to you when I got out of the military. I was I was getting ready to go overseas and start contracting again. And I ended up working for the company when you were the curriculum director.
Yep.
And then and basically as generations pass, as time has moved on, now you run, I still think it's funny, DMT, was it DMT training, defensive mindset training?
Training options, yeah.
What's training? You guys are on Instagram. Do you use any social media? Or do you have any online presence? As the best?
DMT Defenders is our Instagram channel.
Okay.
And we've also got a YouTube channel as well, which we don't use as much because they hide that stuff so bad. Like, it's hard to get out. But we're trying to figure out new ways to engage, in the social media vectors.
And then what's your guys' website? Because you guys offer training through there as well.
Yeah, defensivemindsettraining.com. It's also the Defender University.
Okay.
And it's a huge online training system. It's got material to keep people busy literally for years. It's tons and tons of stuff.
To somebody who is looking at the idea, when you describe something as huge, you have this huge training opportunity or training curriculum developed over what we're looking at, like 14 years now.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got time, you've got skin in the game, you've got time on the field. And so if someone was looking at and seeing it as like there's just so much to consume, what would you recommend on that end?
So the big deal is to try to figure out how to get consistency. And what we tend to see is that people will start to do the same things over and over and over again, not necessarily bad, but then they get bored and there isn't necessarily growth or development. And so what we did from a training perspective, even with the online system, is the system is designed to progressively develop over time. And so we're not seeing the same drills over and over. You'll see the skill elements repeated, but it's not the same kind of drills that you're doing every single day. Oh, I'm going to do my dry fire draws again. Yes, you should do dry fire draws again, but let's try and find ways we can change it up to help you continue to grow and continue to engage. And that's the thing that made us really, really different, was this idea of progressively building skill sets, right, over longer periods of time, right, where a lot of people are doing really good training, right, where they're doing 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, 5 day courses. And the trouble is we as humans don't learn things like that, right? We learn them in small chunks over longer periods of time, right? It's like, going and have a person, let's say just graduated from college as a doctor, right? They're not doing surgery yet for years. And then after they graduate from the residency, right, that skill level of that surgeon then versus 10 or 15 years down the road are not the same thing. And they're learning those skill sets progressively, bit by bit by bit over time. And that's one of the ways I think within the firearms world that we're kind of missing out for opportunities, is we can continue to develop that. It just takes a lot of effort. And as you mentioned, we've been doing this a long time. And, one of the things that we sort of forced ourselves to do back at the beginning was to say, okay, every time you create something, every time you write out a drill, every time you've got to go and put it down. Why are we doing this? And how does it work? And what are you building? And that just turned into this just massive library, right? So I've got a massive library of drills that's probably something on the realm of, I'm gonna ballpark 2,000 to 3,000 drills.
Okay.
It's a huge library, and it's different ways of applying all these underlying skill sets that people want to be able to develop. One of the things I know we've talked about before is I don't do a lot of development on the tactical side of the house, and I don't mean tactical in the sense of like cool gear and kit and stuff. What I mean is there's techniques and there's tactics, and those are not the same thing. So I focus development on the technical side of the house, right? So I want you to be able to accomplish these particular skill sets and to do so without thinking about it. Total unconscious application of the skill set. Then I want people to see people like you and be able to like, okay, now how are we applying those techniques given our environments? And that's where, we've kind of tried to make ourselves a little bit on the different side. Is I want my person to go off and train with, pick your firearms trainer that you like. But when they walk in the place, they know, hey, you've been training with DMT. Yeah, okay, cool. Now let's do stuff at low light with reloads and malfunctions and ninja rolls, and they'd be comfortable saying, go, we can do that.
Good. Yeah, the thing about it that I remember from even back when I was a part of your organization or I was working with you in that field is that the focus was not just a one-day fix. You had different iterations of it, and I got to see it evolve over time. Even now that I've kept up with you, but I think that's a useful asset. The funny thing about it too is that the only thing that I see is sort of like a quote unquote competitor to having that method of like integration, because I'm assuming someone pays a monthly fee, they get access to the library, and then you have some participation where you're kind of not only interacting but guiding the movement in that sense. I would assume that, well, not assume it, but the funny thing is you basically have dry fire, laser bullets, and what you guys are doing.
Right. And
like the laser, I see the laser bullet ad come up pretty often on YouTube and stuff like that.
They must have a very large marketing budget.
Yeah, and like it's not that tool doesn't have its place, but what we're all trying to do, on one hand, we're all trying to figure out how to have more consistent practice and training.
Yep.
Over time, especially over time, and then the other thing we're trying to do is move away from sort of the static, generic, everyone's a toddler kind of mindset in training.
Agreed.
And so I get to say my word is only worth what it is because I've worked with you, but that going forward. So we talked about it for an individual who just started, but we also kicked off this whole conversation on something much more heavy.
Yeah.
And since this show is much more focused on things like that, I wanted to dive really deep into it. Now, I have a theory in our day and age that we live in the post-information age. That you had and what the post-information age is defined by is that it's no longer access to information that is the bottleneck for society. It's the ability to evaluate it. And the bottleneck being those who have access to this information, would be the ones who, those who would have access to information would be the ones that would be able to have access to more, let's just say liquidity in the environment is no longer the case, because with the internet, we all have access to so much information that we don't even have the time to do it. You think about it even in specialization in college.
Right.
You have to have almost 2 layers of specialization just to get a degree.
Right.
That's in the postgraduate. That's after a bachelor's.
Right.
Because there's no way that you can read everything on this subject, whether it's philosophy, whether it's medicine, whether it's computer technology. So the downside of that is if we don't have the tools to evaluate information, we are left with essentially something that is intellectually indifferent than the metaphor of a petri dish. It has all the chemicals necessary to make a bomb or a mold or decay or whatever, but we don't have anything to like build life out of it. You could build life.
What do you do with it?
You could, theoretically, you have all the molecule, you have all the chemicals necessary to create a life or a mushroom. And since decay is going to prefer mushroom, we can't produce life. That's a bad metaphor, but I've been working on it. And a case in point where that comes out is like the conspiracy theory, which is a loaded term by far. So when you were talking in the introduction about one of the challenges that we face is that at least we can say for certain is that they're lying to us.
Oh yeah. Well, everybody. Well, the problem is we've talked about this a little bit on right at the beginning was probably one of the greatest casualties of at least the last 10 years is trust.
Yes.
And I say this to people all the time. It's like, well, this source told me this. And it's like, why do I believe that source? You've engaged with this conversation before, this concept of the Gelman amnesia effect, right? That you're reading a newspaper, you're watching a news article, whatever it is, and the information is totally wrong. Why? You were there. You were involved in this. Like, it's totally wrong. Mm-hmm. And you go, well, this is crap. What is this? And then you turn the page and suddenly the news tells you something new and you go, oh, wow, can you believe this? Mm-hmm. Why do you believe that? And then the other part you mentioned about like the universities and all these different stuff that's happening there. So I read a book when I was in my undergraduate, and it was actually about the education system that occurred in Cuba following the revolution, and was written by a Swedish author. And she was so super enamored with what Castro was doing in Cuba, and so she wanted to go down and she wanted to see this education process as it was developing. So because Castro put this huge literacy push just after he'd come to power, and as she had gone through and she was doing all of this stuff, she was like, this is amazing. This is great. Cuba's going to be this amazing place. Look at what they're going to be able to do. Well, she goes back like 25 or 30 years later to see what the result was. And what they discovered was that all of that extra additional education didn't necessarily produce a more functioning society. Your average cab driver had 3 PhDs. And part of the reason is that because of the system that was developed, as long as you were still engaging in some form of education, government was paying for certain things. And so suddenly people were just pushing this education down the line further and further and further. And so at some point, what did a college degree even mean in Cuba? It doesn't mean anything. Mm-hmm. And we're starting to see the same thing in the United States, right? We're graduating anywhere between 40 and 60,000 undergraduates every single year. To do what? Mm-hmm. And this ends up being like a really big problem, right? So at one point I was considering getting into education, K-12 or whatever education. And I went to go chat with somebody because I knew the person that was the head of the district of the whatever district head. And we started chatting and he's like, man, if you don't have a master's degree, I'm not even going to look at your resume. Mm. And I said, why? I'm like, even for like kindergarten? He's like, even for kindergarten. I said, why? He says, because we have 40,000 teachers a year here. Like, what are you going to do? Like, they're graduating so many teachers across the United States every single year. It's to do what? Mm-hmm. And that ends up going to be one of the biggest problems now with development of AI and things of that nature. You have all kinds of people that have spent all kinds of money and all kinds of time to do what? And now we go into the set of trust, right? Mm-hmm. So you have how many different news sources can you get to? I mean, forget all just the big cable ones, right? How many different news aggregate websites can you start to put together? And they're all engaging with each other, right? It's like a circular firing squad of information. And the question ends up being, who's telling me the truth and how am I going to determine this? This is part of the reason I think groups like YouTube and Google and Apple are trying so hard to decide who is news, mm-hmm. right? There's this terminology of disinformation throwing around everywhere. Who is the news? Well, that's a really important question for them because they would like to be the gatekeepers that decide what is news. You go back and you look at what happened during Vietnam, right? When you had Walter Cronkite sit there and tell the American population, and that's the way it is, we all went, well, Cronkite said it. I mean, of course that's the way it is. Why? Mm-hmm. Why do I believe that that's the way that it is? Mm-hmm. I have a good friend of mine. He's my attorney. And one time I said to him, hey man, if you were king for a day, what would you do? And he kind of laughed at me. He says, oh, well, Beau, what would you do? And I said, well, I'd repeal the 17th Amendment, which is the direct election of senators, and I'd make everybody write a check on tax day. No more getting it taken out of your check. You have to write a check for how much you're giving the government because we'd instantaneously change the way the government functioned. He sat there for a long while, and then he said to me, Beau, I would just really like to know what's really going on. Mm. And I thought, oh, that's so much wiser than me. I was like, I do. And I had to really sit there and process that. And that he said that to me almost a year ago, and I have been stewing on that for a year. I just really wish I knew what was really going on.
That point is so heavy right now. Let's go back to the post-information age and use that as the metaphor. It's like, okay, so if you watch the news, you hear all these things that are going on. Train derailments, 9/11 conspiracies, Hunter Biden, cocaine in the White House, Donald Trump being arrested, whether or not or they're taking your guns, they're not taking your guns, whatever you want to talk about. Mm-hmm. And it almost feels like the world is bifurcated between and I brought this up so many times, but it feels like the world is bifurcated, that we're just living on the surface,
Right.
continuing in the maze. But then once you drop beneath the surface, you find the real world.
Yep.
And the real world is one of heroes and villains, magic that somehow is more real than whatever the laws of physics are above. And down here is where people who make decisions, those decisions have implications. Whereas up above, the only thing that is true is death and taxes. And
Right.
neither of them are even all that meaningful anymore. And so
What do you think about the GameStop thing that happened? Remember the GameStop thing that happened
I
years
remember
ago?
I remember it was not too long ago. It was 2020.
Yeah. So all of a sudden, right, people decide, hey, we're going to mess with the market by engaging in GameStop. Now, were they doing anything that was against any of the rules that had been established for the system? No. The entire system realized that they were being messed with. And so the system just reorganized itself to make sure that, well, you can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And that's where you're talking about, like, you use the example of the maze above, right? I know you've been around Tim Pool before, and he's had the conversation about, like, the rat utopia or the mouse utopia.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you're the mouse in the mouse utopia, like, you don't understand that there's a third person down there looking at you, watching what all this is going on. But there obviously are people that are engaged within some form of the system. The scary part would be is if it's the Ayn Rand version, right? Where she says that the greatest tyranny is the tyranny of the uncaring bureaucrat, right? The bureaucrat that doesn't care. Like, this is just the system and I don't give a rip.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see a lot more of that, I think, where the bureaucracy just moves. And
Yeah.
so you engage in an election. So what? I remember saying this was years ago, as I was starting to wake up to this, I said, okay, what was the largest domestic spending program prior to Barack Obama? Do you know what it was?
I'm going to assume it was something like the Hoover Dam.
Medicare Part D under George W. Bush, his predecessor. Largest federal domestic spending thing in history up to that point.
Okay.
Then in Obama, it's Affordable Care Act.
Yep.
Okay. After Obama, what's the largest federal domestic spending program? The COVID bailouts, the COVID money that went out.
Yep.
And so, right, the thing that I always say to people is, like, what change has happened in any direction?
So I'm going to interrupt you there. The reason why those things don't make any sense to me, and I'm just going to jump out, and I don't know how, maybe I'm the fool in the room, but when you say the largest federal spending act there was one under George Bush, and then within 8 years there was another one under
Notice they're all
Obama.
directly connected to something involving healthcare.
Sure, and healthcare is a hell of a beast.
Yep.
But the point that I'm saying with that one, and perhaps that's the charity demon taking charge of the United States, but, like,
It's the good and plenty clause.
But the point I'm saying is that, okay, when you say the largest spending, by what metric, right? So now I know that it's the biggest, but I don't know by how much, to what extent. Because I can know within my family econ, if I want to buy a pair of night vision, I better have $10K in the bank.
Right.
Then I better have an additional amount of money in the bank so that
You paid for your bills and you paid for your food.
my bills are paid for, right? So, like, I think I assume most people in the United States structure their finances in such a way where they get paid X amount of dollars a month. A certain amount of it goes to something like charity or religion. There's their tithe, and there's their expenses, their hobbies, whether it's a 6-pack of beer a weekend or a 6-pack of beer a night, whether it's, the entertainments, but then they have their expenses and then they have their savings, and this is like average America, right? So if I'm putting, let's just say, $200 a month away in savings, which is hard to do at the right time, that $200 a month eventually gets to buy me my boat, my gun, my suppressor, my whatever. Now, if I even though I have $30,000 in the bank, if I go and buy night vision, and then the next month buy another pair, I did not replenish that amount.
No, right.
So did the money, like, where, if, how, when? Did the money replenish between Bush and Obama?
Oh, it didn't.
Oh, so it's
different. You got entirely different paradigm, right? You're talking about something that has a budget, right? Or that you have to pay your debts.
Yes.
Right? And the trouble is that we live in a society where if you're a state, the state has to cover its debts. So the states can't go into debt. But the federal government is trillions in debt and continuing to grow. What is it? Is it $1 billion every second they're adding to the federal debt?
Yeah.
And so when you're talking about a metric, the trouble with talking about a metric is you're also dealing with something, if you will, again, let's go back to our rat utopia or mouse utopia. You're dealing with somebody outside of what everybody's doing.
Yeah, the closed environment.
Yeah, they don't, right? They don't, I mean, they care somewhat what happens in the closed environment, but because they're the outside of it, they can keep adding things into the closed environment.
If you're a citizen in the United States, you exist within a closed economy. If you are not, if you are a bank, if you are, whatever, you exist outside of that box.
Right.
And
it isn't a closed system.
That's a better way of making the distinction between the overworld and the underworld.
Right.
I think
and then if you start to go and engage in history, right, there have been times of reset. Now, generally speaking, reset happens because of war, right? Some sort of famine or disease.
Yep.
And the other one is there's some sort of a massive reset of the system. If you look at it historically, right?
Okay.
And this is the one that I use as an example, right? So Germany spent itself into oblivion in the time period between World War I and World War II.
Dude, I just watched All Is Quiet on the Western Front. That I know that's an interruption. I'm sorry.
No, it's good.
Go ahead.
So they spent a huge amount of money in the time between World War I and World War II, primarily to pay off reparations for what had existed during what happened in the war. So they just spent themselves to oblivion, massive money printing, huge hyperinflation. Well, at some point they had to revalue the Deutschmark because the Deutschmark had been basically demolished. Mm-hmm. So how did they revalue the Deutschmark? How did they do it? Well, they revalued the Deutschmark to land.
Okay.
So who's the largest landowner and growing in the United States?
Bill Gates.
The banks and the federal government.
Okay.
So
I'm wrong on everything.
Bill Gates obviously is going, he's adding more to it, but that's beside the point. The banks, right? The big investment houses, right? The banks, the big investment houses.
The Bureau of Land Management.
And the federal government's the fastest growing landowners in the United States. So if you look at it in history, because this happened after Zimbabwe, this happened after Argentina, this happened after Germany. When the money eventually collapses, you have to revalue it to something. And almost universally, they revalue it to the value of land.
Yep.
So I'm not trying conspiracy theory, right?
It's not a conspiracy.
I'm not saying
theory.
This is just it's a guess, and it's purely a guess based on historical evidence, and that's all you can do as a historian. So I'm a historian by undergraduate education,
So
but
I was Napoleon.
and really all history is just telling out of events at a perspective.
Yep.
And the biggest challenge that you have when you try to study history, this goes back to the information thing, is who am I learning this informational history from, right? Because if you read A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, which by the way is one of the most popularly and widely used textbooks in history in the United States, that's written by Howard Zinn. Howard Zinn is an open communist. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're going to get a very different perspective on history from them than if you read something from, say, like David Barton and Wall Builders, right? Or America the Last Best Hope by Bill Bennett. And the trouble ends up being with history is I can help to shape the way you think about something just if I shape the way it is that I build the background or build the history to it.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna jump the ship again a little bit. I don't know. I understand what it's like to read communist literature, but the funniest thing that we do when we read communist literature is we read it like they're a person with integrity. Right, and I know it sounds like an insult. Like I know
it's the James Lindsay quote, right? Karl Marx is a BS artist.
Yeah. I mean, dude, I don't got a problem if we curse on the show. It's just funny what it is. But yeah, he makes this point. Is that like the point that I'm saying is this one is that if your moral framework is based on no truth but power, then everyone should treat you like that.
Right.
But the thing is that you exist in an environment where the communist exists in an environment where people treat him like he's a human being while he makes decisions like a rabid dog.
Oh, right.
He chooses what he wants when he wants, and he claims it as a right.
It's very abusive.
Well, it's not
very
only is it
abusive situation.
But then if you think about it this way, if your moral framework, and which is going to have an influence on your epistemological framework, is literally something that there is no truth, metaphysical statement, but power, additional metaphysical statement, as in there is no such thing as morality, which what makes me happy, and there is no such thing as that which is true, except for what whoever is in power determines to be true, then how can you expect that person to say anything other than that which they believe will grant them the chew toy at the end of the stick?
Right.
And so it's this intriguing game that we play in this market of like the historian, right? And if the historian says, I am a communist, you must assume that everything that they're writing is intended to produce an outcome.
Right. Autor.
And that outcome is not description.
No, right.
The only thing
it's direction. Because remember that anything that if you go and you dig into the writings from whether you're Hegelian stuff or Marx stuff, you guys have to understand that the eventual goal is praxis.
Yes,
right.
And which is a religious action.
Right. It's it's the ability to go out and accomplish a particular goal, whatever that particular goal is of the author. And this is where, education, we go back to the concept of what's happening, education, information, right? So if you're getting information from somebody who has the metaphysical worldview that you just described, right? Then the idea is that the goal for that information to come to you is for you to accomplish a certain praxis that they want you to accomplish.
Yep. It's literally, I will lie to you to make you do what I want you to do. It's manipulation from the core.
Yeah, it's some sort of a form of manipulation. This is part of the reason, when we think about what's happening within society, this is why the greatest casualty, especially in the last 5 or 10 years, is trust. Because people are starting to become awake to the idea that they're being abused. And they're being abused by everybody involved. I mean, let's not suddenly say that we're partisan on this, right? Like, there are people from every single side that are trying to abuse you. And the trouble that we're having is we've lost the ability to say we as a society have some kind of a plumb line. An interesting philosophical argument at some point is, did the society ever have a plumb line?
No, I don't think it ever had a universal. There was no golden age of man. Now that is something that I believe in my own right. Like, even the neoclassical era of Napoleon, back to my studies in history, was a time where it had an aesthetic I like. People have written about it. The French Revolution is extremely intriguing to me, partly because of nightmares that I had when I was a kid. Right? Like, I had a dream when I was 8 years old of standing in a courtyard, almost a medieval style courtyard, watching somebody get hanged and somebody else get beheaded by a guillotine.
Wow!
And it's almost like that very end of Braveheart style dream, which might have had something to do with it, to be honest.
Had watched the movie recently.
But in that, I remember being young in this dream, and like I said, I wasn't quite 10 years old because we still lived in the oldest house that I've lived in, and it was like I was moving my way through the crowd to witness an execution. That was the dream. So the greatest tragedy is trust. We have to address that in two ways. One of them is trust. Let's call gun culture a tribe for the sake of the argument.
Sure. And
what I mean by a tribe, I mean there are in-group and out-group rules.
Right.
So if you're in the circle, if you're in the tribe, and let's make sure that's a big tent.
Yep.
Because gun culture is a big tent with an ambiguous wall. It's the edges are not painted with a hard line or a Sharpie. They're painted with a watercolor.
Agreed.
There's a point where we know you're not in, but we're not exactly sure where that line is all the time. There are certain things like, oh, well, I don't think people should have guns. Well, then you're probably not in gun culture, but that's beyond the pale. So the tribalism element, or not the tribalism, the tribe sense of gun culture being there's in-group rules, we treat each other this way, and then there's out-group rules. Even as a society, we're using gun culture as a metaphor as the average American citizen as well, because the link between that person and let's use up, even though it's not a religious, more on that in a minute. Mm-hmm. The link between what is going on in their country might be their connection to their state, their economy, their country is not only either broken, but it's one of distrust.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah,
so who's the guy? There's the guy on one of the television shows that, the cable TV, that whatever he predicts in the stock market, you always do the opposite.
Oh, Kramer,
right? Yeah. Whatever he says, do the opposite. You'll make money. This isn't financial advice.
Yeah.
So you
We're not financial advisors. We are not attorneys. We did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
We did. No, we didn't. I was starting to read Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. That's a weird book.
Hunter S. Thompson is a weird human.
Yeah. Some people I know really like him, and I'm trying to figure out what I think about it, because at least he writes, but we're beyond the pale.
It's a really funny video of him getting in a gunfight with his neighbors.
No, we'll do this later. We can't cut to it because it's probably copyrighted somewhere. But there's distrust between the citizens and their government, and now there's distrust, and there's also distrust between the citizens and themselves.
Absolutely.
Let's break those two apart. Mm-hmm. So, projection. Tucker, I was at a speech where I saw Tucker Carlson say it. I've heard James Lindsay say it. Yep. I've heard Jordan Peterson say it. Yep. I've heard Tim Pool say it. I've heard, and these are all right-wing personalities. Don't get me wrong.
Well, Tim Pool is a leftist. Jordan Peterson, or Tim Pool's not a leftist, he's a liberal. Yeah. Right? So I want to call him a center-left liberal.
I know Tim, and I understand that he is a liberal. I think it would be beneficial for his position to help to just establish that a little bit more.
And then Jordan Peterson at one point worked for basically the Communist Party of Canada.
Yep, but he also repented.
Yeah, he did. He's walked away from all that, but he did at one point, right?
Yep.
James Lindsay was part of the New Atheist Movement and was
repented of that.
Repented of that as well, which is very interesting. Yep. And so I think that's another one's very interesting. It's like, what does right and left even mean anymore, right? But let's go back to this idea of this trust, right? Tim Pool says the difference between the people that trust the media and those that don't trust the media are the people that actually pay attention.
Okay.
And I think that's a really interesting one, right? So there's a phrase, all of us as historians know it, like your level of trust in government and your understanding of history should be inversely related.
Yep.
Right? So the more that you understand history, the less you should trust your government. I think the more that people actually go out and are distrustful of the media, right, also are people that tend to have a better grasp of history because they go, wait a minute here, you're lying to us. We know you're lying to us, and we have to try to figure out the element in between. I think within the gun culture, I think we've got a challenge with this too. Like nobody should sit here and trust us, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like trust us implicitly. You don't know us, right? We're trying to give you, right, you know, what we're saying from our experience and our background. So I have this element of what I call my 4 pillars of my teaching philosophy. And the first is I'm always open-minded, trying to find the best thing I can find. 2, if you know something better, please tell me what it is, because far be it from my ego to get in the way. Number 3 is I'll never tell you to do something because I told you to. I'll have 3 to 5 reasons for absolutely everything. And if I don't, that's not on you. That's for me to go figure out. None of those reasons, and this is the important part, none of my reasons to ask you to do something will be based on what's called an appeal to experiential authority.
Okay.
Because my X and your Y, or I saw this guy do it, or this happened when I was over there doing this, because my X and your Y are never the same. So I have to base it on something where we can have some kind of mutual trust in it. And so I try to base it on things like physics, physiology, neuroscience, legalities. And that's where I'll try to base any of my firearms training arguments on. Politics and stuff like that, that's right. We can use historical events. It's hard to do it because people are people, right?
Yep. Governments are consisted of people. People are people. It's what do you believe about people's constitution, as in what constitutes a man.
Exactly. And then the last one is just to round it out. The last one is I never want you to walk away wondering why. Please ask me why. I really want to tell you.
Good.
And so now I think if we can apply any of that to we're thinking about these events within the gun culture is, all right, so person in gun culture says something. Why do I believe you? And if they can go and give you good reasons for why that is, and they can give you something that you can actually hold in your hand, even metaphysically hold it in your hand, that gives you a better chance of actually believing what it is. And I think that's where you talk about how there's that water painted line around the tribe. Yeah, I really think so, because I think people slide in and they slide out of gun culture, being part of the tribe, because you say, for example, like, all of a sudden we had the Floyd riots, right? Because here in Minnesota, we had them real bad.
Yep.
But during the George Floyd riots, suddenly people across the country that never, ever, ever thought about buying a gun were out running around buying guns.
Yep.
And they were like, what do you mean I can't just come in here and buy a gun? What do you mean I have to go get this? And what do you mean I have to go get that? And the frustration from the people in the tribe is, guys, it was the people you supported that put that in place.
Yeah,
that's now blocking you. You voted for that.
You voted for this.
And now you're upset that suddenly it affects you, right? Well, there's a challenge here, because on one side of the house, you do want to confront them and say, hey, wait a minute. You're the reason we had this happen, that you're now having to go through this. But 2, it's like, okay, welcome to the party, pal. All right, come here, come in. Let's get started here. How can we help you move a little bit down the line? Because if you will, right, you mentioned communism in some regard as a religion. I mean, after studying all this stuff and listening to I don't know how many hundreds of hours of James Lindsay's podcast, but communism is a leftist Gnostic alchemist religion, and they're very good at evangelizing. Well, how good are we, people that are in the gun culture, evangelizing to people? I mean, one of the things I tell people all the time is you should be the example of a good gun owner, of a safe gun, of an effective gun owner. Because if you're nice to them and you're good to those people, when all of a sudden it's like, oh, we should round up guns, you should be the person like, yeah, but why am I taking it from Forrest, man? I mean, he's responsible. He does the right things.
This is where I might actually disagree with you. But I don't. I want you to. I want to hear more, because I just keep going, because I get the idea of the good citizen. Like, you want to be a good representation to your neighbors. There's many cases of this where I think it's kind of an overt side. Like, I don't want my neighbors to look at me. I bought a house. I live in a neighborhood. I want, if my neighbors know that I own firearms, I want them to be, if nothing, more at peace with the security of their environment, not less.
Yeah.
I think that people own guns not for self-defense alone, but because they actually care about their surrounding environment. It's almost like a sense of stewardship, which goes a level beyond self-defense. It's not so there's that aspect. But I've had that issue. I've had that problem before, and this is what I've run into. When the George Floyd riots happened, everyone I knew who lived in Minnesota who was in gun culture said the same thing. X person I knew came to me and said, "Hey, I need your help getting a gun," even though that person was against firearms ownership, was against whatever, and they all fit in this. It was almost a script, right? Oh, I knew somebody. The riots happened. You know what happened? My liberal friend called me and said, I need to buy a gun. And I told him, tough luck, buddy. They're sold out. Or, tough luck, buddy. You don't have a permit to carry. Those classes aren't happening right now because of COVID lockdown, right? And so it's like, and you believe in this institution, right?
Right.
That wasn't the stuff that bothered me because in the one sense, we all kind of knew it was going to happen. And in the other sense, that was a benefit. The part that was actually frustrating was that there were people that I was encountering who were in support of confiscation and possession of firearms, but they had their own.
Right.
And their rule was, I am an enlightened person.
Right.
I am the next Martin Luther King Jr.
Yep.
Therefore, I need my guns, but you don't.
Yes.
Because you're a domestic extremist. You're a white nationalist. And there was this attitude that came from these individuals that was supremely unique and aggravating to the core. And it was this idea that I am an activist. Therefore, I need a gun because I need to defend myself against you, the lowly rabble, the KKK is the, whatever. And it was just like, that's where it is. They weren't wealthy people hiring security guards. That was a travesty in its own. But they were the people who said, yeah, we should confiscate firearms because, and then they'll come to you and they'll hit you with their elbow and they'll say, yeah, but I'm not going to give mine up because I need them.
Oh, yeah.
I need them. I'm whatever. I am a minority. And back to the words of James Lindsay, I am a minoritized individual. I need it for self-defense. Oh, why you and not, my father who lives in the rural country? Oh, because he's a white man. That doesn't count. And you're like,
I remember
wow.
seeing there was some of that would go down. I agree. We had one point, we had a person come in who wanted to do a bunch of training because he was acting as security for some of these more radical activist groups. Mm-hmm. And we told him no, I'm not engaging with that. And he was very upset with us. And so we just started showing him some videos. And it was stuff he'd never seen before. Mm-hmm. Like he'd never seen some of these different videos. He'd never seen different parts and pieces. He'd never seen these things that had gone down. And he was like, well, I never saw that. I'm sure you didn't. But, if you're going to go and paint me into this corner, right, as you described, why am I going to go? So the other part is too, is like, if you realize that you think that I'm such a danger for you, right? I'm the person that's there, that's trying to be dangerous. Yeah, it's actually a deeper conversation actually to have at some point. And it'd be really neat to get, someone like a James Lindsay or what's his name? Larry Elder to converse on this. But very, very quickly. So I did a permit to carry one time at the request of a friend. Mm-hmm. And she wanted me to do this class because she was very concerned because these friends that she wanted me to do this class for, she was concerned that they would be discriminated against if they had gone somewhere else. And so I'm like, I don't understand. I just, I teach a class. I'm very libertarian, go do you. I don't care. Turns out her friends were hardcore gay rights activists, like really, really hardcore, like militant almost.
And like we'll burn down your church if you don't put a flag on it? Or like
I don't know if they're that far at this point, but to give you an idea, at one point we were chatting and they're trying to understand the law because I'm like, look, I'll do the class for the friend, right? Mm-hmm. On your behalf, I'll teach you the class. And we were having this conversation because they're trying to help them understand the law. And they're like, okay, so I'm trying to understand this. So let's say I'm out with my friends and there are people over there and they're saying the most horrible, vile, terrible, awful stuff. I can shoot them? No. But they're saying like terrible, horrible, threatening things. Can I shoot them? I said, no. What are they doing?
Yeah.
But they're calling us all kinds of stuff and they're calling us things that are vile and blah, blah, blah. I can defend myself. What are they doing? Okay, we're out at Pride and they're skinheads yelling that they hate gay people. Can I shoot them? No. And it's like, it was very, very interesting to be like, okay, your worldview is that if I go and I call you names, that the response should be violence. Like I can't, like, I mean, I don't have Plumlin on this.
I mean, I've met people like that and they were stabbed to death by 17.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
They got themselves baked into a gang, and they thought they were the hottest thing, and they were really great. And you know what happened? They just got stabbed.
They get killed, right?
Like I get that. I understand that mentality exists. The unusual thing is it's in the trapping of a pseudo intellectual individual. Right? This is kind of the problem that we deal with in culture is that like I think this is one of the problems that we deal in culture is that we are sort of reevaluating and trying to engage with how do we evaluate one another because the standards have changed and they will continue to change, but that's the responsibility of being
part of it is defining the terms, right?
Yeah,
like
right?
how the heck I don't even know necessarily we say certain words. And it's like I don't know what you mean by that when you say that.
Outside of overt manipulation going on, okay.
Right? This is where, again, I think this is like the thought I was having before, which I think should be a deeper conversation, right? Is if you're... So we talk about what are the big boogeymans in society, especially if you follow certain media, right? So we have new terms popping up like Christian nationalist and domestic extremist, and we start to look at what these definitions are. And I start to go and I look and I think to myself, okay, are people attempting to create the boogeyman they're afraid of?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I'm not even. Given there are going to be different degrees of Satanism, and I know that's kind of over the top for the purpose of the podcast, but absolutely. I read Barbara Walters. I read How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. I read the Antifa Handbook. I read They Want to Kill Americans by Malcolm Nance. Malcolm Nance is the best example, but all of the other ones contributed.
Sure.
They need an enemy so they can justify their violence.
Agreed.
And while the Antifa Handbook says it in the most deliberate, not the most deliberate way, the more kind of technical way, Malcolm Nance says it in the most overt way. He not only has he is. I wouldn't call him an intellectual or an academic, but that's 100% his book. They Want to Kill Americans is, I'm going to tell you that these people are bad, and therefore we should reorient our government to investigate and destroy all of those people. He is participating in a jihad, and he knows it. And if he doesn't know it, that's even worse.
Right,
but
that's worse. Oh, yeah.
The most egregious one I think would be Barbara F. Walters or Walter. I think it's just, I don't think there's an S. It doesn't matter. She claims to be an academic of the highest think tank organization. In the same way that Nance claims to be a retired Navy intel officer who dealt in counterterrorism, Malcolm Nance makes the most basic mistake. And that is, when you're dealing with an insurgency, he's supposed to be a counterinsurgency expert. When you're dealing with an insurgency, the responsibility of the expert is to sort the insurgents from the people.
Right.
If you're going to deal with the Maoism thing, right? The insurgent swims through the water. It's the fish in the water. The water is the people. The metaphor goes, the people are the water that they move through. The purpose of a counterinsurgency movement or a counterinsurgency force, and as an intellectual discernment, is to separate the insurgent from the people. Malcolm Nance is the literal opposite. Do I want you? Do I not like you? You fit in the category. Can I make this umbrella broad enough so that I can take your stuff?
Right.
Then there you go. And he literally does the opposite. Barbara Walters is a Barbara Walter is a shame on academics.
I'm going to find that one. I don't know that
It's
one.
How Civil Wars Start. Okay. How Civil Wars Start. She's a shame on academics because the very premise of her book was proven false the day that it was right at the same time it was published, and she didn't pull it off the shelf. And she premised her entire book on the Governor Whitmer plot.
Oh yeah.
And she wrote this fantastical story on all this kind of stuff. Which goes back to the thing, the biggest tragedy is trust. Because there's two ways we're going to go with this one. But her that was her basis of her argument was the Governor Whitmer plot happened, therefore white ring extremism. And you want to know if somebody's in a militia, they attend church and own a gun.
That's it.
If they fit those two criteria, fucking investigate and be done with it.
Man, that's terrible. I mean, what do you do with all of the progressive people that own guns and attend Universalist churches?
I'm being a little, well, they're not, I'm being hyperbolic. So if I'm going to give her academic charity, her ability to discern groups and discern peoples is so frighteningly terrible that I think she should retire from academia and in shame until she can figure it out.
But it gets into a different problem, right? The long march to the institutions, but it goes back again to this concept of trust. And the challenge right now is, let's go back to talking about people being in the tent versus people being out of the tent, right? So we had these progressive people, all of a sudden they're more liberal people, or maybe they were totally uninformed people, and they're suddenly now starting to try to like dabble their toes into gun culture, and they're obviously learning stuff that, quite frankly, they didn't know before.
Sure.
Because they hadn't encountered people that were different, right? They hadn't encountered, they say all the time, people that, live in the rural countryside and stuff like that. Well, you're just, the Barack Obama quote, right? The people with an antipathy with those that do not look like them. And it's like, well, no, not necessarily at all, right?
You have no idea how rural people live, and that's all that.
Yeah, and more than that too, it's like
you're disconnected from half the country.
And you haven't come and chatted with us at all. Like, you have no idea. There was a guy that worked for NPR that actually did this. I remember listening to interviews with him where he had gone and done all this traveling through the central part of the country, and he was like, "We're two different countries. Like, we're not even the same at all."
Oh, absolutely.
And this again goes to the concept of trust, right? So, the sides distinctly do not trust each other. And it's like, how can we help to build some of that layers of trust? Actually, I think one of the best ways to do it is to have more people training together. One of the initiatives that I've tried to work on for a while was to get law enforcement to come in and do training with my citizens that are training.
That would be useful, yeah.
The nice part about that is the law enforcement gets exposed to people that are actually doing training properly, right? Instead of looking at people and being concerned about it, it's like, well, these are your neighbors, these are your friends, these are the people that you were there, right? Separating now the police officer from the community that he was working with, same problem, right? But we're separating now all kinds of different stuff. So we've separated the tribe from the not tribe. And because that level of trust has just been cratered across the board, like there's just nothing that holds up any trust anymore. They do the surveys every year. Like, do you trust this? Do you trust that? And the one that had prevailed for such a long time was the military, right? The military was one of these ones that had just a high level of trust for years and years and years and years. And that's just cratered. Like, it's completely cratered. And it's cratered not just because of, current aggressive politics, but it's cratered because some of the things the military has done, right? So, one of the elements we have, I don't know how to best describe it to you or best describe it for anybody that's listening, but, trust is our biggest problem. And it's like, you can't walk around completely distrusting everybody, right? That's how societies turn into just nightmares, right?
Well, I mean, you can do it as an individual, but then you're a nihilist and you'll destroy yourself. Like, it is a tragedy. It is a tragedy in the classic sense of the word, because your inability to trust is connected to character.
Right.
But I interrupted. Go ahead.
No, you're totally right. And you'll get whole societies that'll pathologize themselves that way, right? You read Matthias Desmet's book about, mass formation psychosis, and he goes through one of the mass formations in Iran. And it had gotten to the point where there was a young man, he got hung, and his mother was the one that turned him in. And she was so damn proud of herself that she turned in this counter-revolutionary. Well, that happened in China too with the Red Guard. It happened in Germany under the National Socialists.
And when I was in Ukraine, I saw what I refer to as the ghost of communism. Is wherever it didn't, in a certain series of areas that I had traveled through, some of it in Slovakia, not as much in Poland, but there was some, but especially in the Ukraine areas the Ukrainian areas that I got to travel through. If you've never left the country and if you've never left the United States and you've never been introduced to an entire culture where distrust is the norm, it is eerie.
Yeah.
Because their first reaction, anyone's first reaction to seeing you, is to call the military, over and over and over again. Like, like that's just what they did. Like,
I believe it.
It was You'd ask somebody a question, they'd hear your accent, they call the military, and then you're like, I'm literally getting a coffee, the distrust that had passed from the communist era to their era had left a shadow over the entire generation, and that is hell.
Oh yeah.
That is hell in the sense of everyone's an informant. Like, they were so distrustful that a person spoke English, understood American norms, understood American, was familiarized with American norms, and just by seeing somebody they didn't recognize that spoke English, called the military as if they were a Russian spy, as if they were an informant, and so that level of distrust, where even things like you go to a restaurant and you order your food and they give you the wrong food. You don't say anything because they call the military and claim that you're a whatever because you're not from town here. And it's a very, very, very scary, odd place to be. We were even in like a hotel and the military was called on us for for whatever. And we were woken up by 8 dudes piling in a door. The last one, Krinkov at the hip, fully open, conscript, no idea what he was doing, 55 years old, kind of pudgy, terrified.
Yeah.
And that was like, that is a scary position to be in, but it was distrust. The only thing that I know is I don't trust you.
Yep.
Why? For no reason. That's the foundation. Not
Right.
because you need to earn my trust, not because we need to earn repertoire, but a society built on that will continue to shamble through time.
Oh, they call this the
Walking Dead.
The generational stuff, right? You see this in homes where there was abuse, right? They carry it then to their house, their home, and then they carry it down, they carry it down, they carry it down. And I remember who I was listening to years ago. It was a lady podcaster, and she's a psychologist or something. And she's like, after what happened, with the lockdowns and 2020 riots and stuff like that, and the fact that the trust is lost, like, it's going to take literal therapy for people to I have friends, and I use friends in the sense that I'm trying the best to be friends, and that are still walking around as though, right, they could have the germ of COVID on them and die at any moment, right? They're triple masked outside in 100-degree heat, and they won't come within 6 feet of you. I mean, it was absolutely scarring to them. And you get a society that goes through something like communism, which was very, very, I have a good friend we have kids that go to the same school together, and he came over from a communist country, and he describes this all the time as we pretended to work and they pretended to pay us.
Yep.
And we pretended, we would get on the phone and you would hear this click happen on the phone, and everybody's suddenly like, yes, communism. Wasn't communism great? Communism is great. And you just simply existed, that everywhere you go, you assumed you were being spied to, that everyone that was around you was going to set you up. But he's like, it would go down, right? You would have trouble with somebody, or they were loud or whatever in the apartment next door, and so you would make a call that they were counter-revolutionaries or anti-communists or whatever, and the secret police would come in, and you would never see that family again. And pretty soon your next door neighbors would be quieter because you just let them know what happened with the previous ones. And we're seeing this in some regards, like even now. That's why you really called, sort of what's happening to our country some sort of a Maoist revolution. That's what happens on social media. I can make a claim against you on social media, whether it's true or not, and suddenly all of a sudden we've got, channels being shut down, people losing jobs, all kinds of stuff. And that's a really, really bad place to be, because one is it stifles the ability for us to sit here and have these conversations, or people to hear us having these conversations, for them to have those conversations on their own, which I think is probably the most important thing. We used to have the pub for a reason. You would go into the pub and you would hash stuff out. The entire American Revolution came about because of people sitting in pubs having arguments.
Yep. And if you want to read about it, read Paul Revere's Ride, and I don't remember who it was written by, but it's a moderately thick book, maybe about 200 pages, maybe 125. It's not too big, but it's a really good one because it starts with like the history of Paul Revere. And that was the first time when I read about him, and I was in college, and I went, oh, this dude was a dude. He wasn't like pull off the cape superhero man. It's just like, He literally got together with his friends at the pub every weekend,
Yep.
and they got tired of the garbage that was going on in their community.
Yep.
So they decided, we ain't gonna have it anymore,
Right.
and that created suspicion. And they didn't initiate, and then someone came to took their stuff, and they're like, "All right, it's on, boys."
Let's do it. Yep.
And it wasn't like, there wasn't like the British are coming like, "Oh my god!" It was like, it's happening. It's happening.
Time. And that's the other one too that I find really interesting from the sense of the trust factor, right? Is if you don't know who to trust, how do you know when it's happening? How do you know when it's time?
So the outside looking in is the inside looking out, from the tribe looking up, or just the citizenry to the government. That distrust, it's broken, it's fractured, it's in shambles. Some of it is because of lying media, dishonest politicians, and the excess of information. So it's not entirely malicious. There is some of the distrust between the people and our culture or our government or whatever is because we live in the internet age, where you are now permitted to entertain your darkest fantasies on your Black Mirror with no apparent consequences at the cost of your soul.
Right.
But on the inside is where I'm really worried about right now, because let's use this as a story. I've known my friend for 10 years. I've known this guy for 10 years, and he's a good friend of mine, and I trust him. And some of the stuff that we like to do is what you'd call edgy. It's like throw on night vision and ride a Suron into the desert on Bureau land, right? Completely legal. With what it doesn't matter about its legality, right? But we did this we did this once where we went on a night ride with electric bikes, night vision, and I had an APC 9K, right? So little teeny 9mm guns. This is suppressed and everything. And it's like, was that illegal? No. But I mean, damn, if you wanted to set somebody up, that's how you do it. Because you go out and hang out, and then boom, you're involved in something. And now, the horrific feeling was suddenly wondering if my friend was actually my friend.
Yep.
Or if he was trying to bait. He was doing a Gretchen Whitmer to me.
Right.
And I was being led along all along.
Right.
And that has happened. That's what really keeps me up at night, is this idea that I don't even know if my friends are even my friends anymore.
Right.
And how that feeling is it's terrifying. It's not like, oh, I'm scared. No, that's a terrifying feeling. And then seeing that extrapolated ad infinitum. Yep. What do you think about that? Because the whole Fed thing, the glowies, the feds, the infestation, the sowing of distrust, the fertile field that allows distrust to grow. Yep. And I'm saying within the community, within gun culture, because we trust each other generally speaking, but there are exceptions.
Right. I think there's probably 4 people. There might be 4 that if they showed up at my house and they were all jocked up and they said, it's time to go do boogaloo stuff, I would say, okay. But there's about 4. And aside from that, it'd be like, no, go put your crap back. It's probably not time. And I remember somebody saying this to me once, if you run out in the street and you're all jocked up and you're the only person out in the street, you probably should go back.
Yes.
And so I think there's a couple of problems, right? So
But the inversion of that is that social experiment where they had a woman getting beat in the street and everyone said somebody else was going to do it.
Yeah, somebody else was going to do it. And I think it's on purpose what's happening with the DAs and stuff like that. They're trying to build that. They want that to be to the extreme. You are not allowed to do anything.
Yep.
I shared a video recently where they were people in Canada were just going to people in Canada and being like, do you have the right to self-defense? And people in Canada were like, well, yes, of course I do. And then they would read them the statute that says they do not have the right to self-defense in Canada. And they just stood there just shocked. Like, wait, I can't defend myself? No, you can't. And we're setting up that same element. Is now right at the point right now in the United States, right? We haven't quite achieved the point where we would say, or our leaders would say, you do not have the right to defend yourself. But they are very, very aggressively working towards the idea you cannot defend anybody else.
I mean, I think Alvin Bragg is politically doing that, and I think he's doing it for malicious reasons.
Well, he's not the only one doing that.
I know he's not the only one, but he's the easiest example.
He's the easiest example is Alvin Bragg and what is it? Neely?
Yeah, that was Neely,
I can't think of
and
the
it
name.
was his name. this is where I feel bad. Because,
Forgive me, I don't remember every stat.
but he's been doing. I think I've seen 3 stories now outside of even him indicting Trump that had to do with him going after people for exercising self-defense.
Yeah, he went after the guy that was getting assaulted and attacked in the newspaper, the bodega. Who ended up fighting
4
back.
now. Okay.
Yeah, so he went after him too, and so they're working very hard to be able to to set this up. And so this is part of the reason you're seeing certain elements of cities just continue to decay because nobody can do anything about it.
But that's still
cops can't do anything about it. Any of that stuff.
That's still a distrust between the DA and the people. I'm talking about distrust within the community.
That's another part where this is an extrapolation. So you start to see that, and it starts to filter into your life. And remember, you talked about the black mirror. You lose something every time that you see one of those, and you now start to see where people might be taken out of context or things of that nature. I don't want to say the name of the influencer just because I don't want to get into that, but very, very important gun culture influencer, and he was on a podcast, and he basically said that no one under the age of 21 should own an AR-15, and it might be in consideration for us to find a way to put those on the NFA. And he's a very prominent. Like if I said who this is, and we'd have to find the quote to be exact, so I'm not getting the quote exact, but it was very much a pro gun control position. And okay, well, I'm starting to lose some trust with you. What do you mean that you? I had a discussion one time with one of my students who sits further on the left.
Okay.
And the student that was on a little further, that's further to the left than me, super great guy. But we were having a discussion after some mass murder event that had occurred. And he said, Beau, I keep wondering, I said, is there a way that we can have some kind of a compromise on gun safety? And I went, I don't understand how this compromise is supposed to work. I said, are you going to give me the removal of suppressors from the NFA? No. Are you going to give me the removal of short barrel rifles from the NFA? No. Are you going to give me universal concealed carry? I can carry anywhere in the country. No. Okay, so what am I getting out of this compromise? It's like you don't want compromise from me, you want capitulation. Within the gun community, we tend to see the same thing as well. If you don't have this particular kit or that particular firearm or this particular setup or you train in this particular way, well, you're just a moron, you don't know what you're talking about. And that breeds distrust, because if I can figure out only one thing that you're wrong on,
I have to ask you in that one, because I'm not instructing at the same capacity that you are. And and I've had my participation in gun culture is sometimes from the media, sometimes not from philosophy, contracting and so on and so forth. I don't know if I see that very often. I have a hard time with that. Like, I see it in certain cases where people will say, if you don't have this kit, you're not, I don't know. But I really don't find that very often. And usually it's coming from what I would call mid-level management.
Oh, sure.
It's a guy who isn't cool enough to be in the cool kids club, but
it's the people that are trying way too hard.
Yeah, and I have a problem with it because I usually see that correlating with somebody who's not playing the game. And what I mean by not playing the game is that they're not really contributing anything to gun culture, but they're screaming for legitimacy.
Oh, sure.
Okay, very rare, not common. And I'm saying this is it's a very uncommon thing before it turns into somebody else's controversy. But like, I know that there are people who play that kind of bourgeoisie elitism.
Oh, sure.
I'm not poor like you, but still, when it comes to brass tacks and hard knocks, they're not getting a phone call from anybody. Right? You're not on the cool guy list that when the thing goes sideways, people are going to be calling you. You want to be, but because you're an asshole, you're not on that list. Right. But what you do is you assuage your sense of guilt by pissing on those you see below you.
Right.
That's why it's the mid-level management game. Bro, shit rolls downhill. The Delta Force didn't call me and bring a Huey to my backyard to send me on a mission to go save, the world. So you're not cool like me. And It's like, whatever, man. So the instructor thing, there is the other side of it. I see like, if you don't train like this, you're going to die.
I've seen that too.
Yep. And I've seen it, but it's just kind of like, Thanks. Moving on.
Yeah, right.
Because it doesn't do anything for me. It is a zero sum. It's not a zero sum game. It's a zero benefit conversation.
No, and this is where I because I'm so in the whole gun culture world, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a nobody. I understand that I'm a nobody. In some regards I'm cool with it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also the guy that if there's something that I don't understand, it's like, please tell me. I really want to understand this. Where I start to get challenged or troubled by this, right, is you had the guy that you just mentioned, if you don't train this way, you're going to die. Okay, please explain why. And I can't be because, well, I did this when I was part of X, Y, and Z Super Ninja Group. I don't care about that. Please tell me why, because it's got to be something that I can tangibly grab a hold of. I remember one time I was out doing a precision rifle training thing out in California. And the initial instructor guy that was out there, he's everything in training that I would never, ever allow myself to be. But he's got a really famous school. So he's out there doing this stuff, and he's like, all you got to do is set up your rip list. And he ran through his rip list, and it was like, tick, 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 tick. And I went, okay, cool. I was like, okay, that's cool. I'd like to understand what this is. Can you do that again? Can I get that so I can write it down? He went through it as fast and walked away from me. And I'm going, well, how was I supposed to learn that? Well, then we start to get out and we're like doing our zeroing, all this different stuff, and eventually we're working on some other shooting stuff. And after we were done with the initial zeroing, double checking that everything was zeroed, we were working with a different instructor because he had to go off and do something. So he had this guy, and this guy, if you want to say in gun culture world, like he had every I dotted every T crossed that you can think of. And so we were shooting, and as I was doing my zeroing, everything was really, really tight, right? Sub 1 MOA, like very, very close, very tight stuff, great rifle setup. And then after I was done, because I was still pretty new to this, the lead instructor guy's like, you can switch to ball ammo now if you want. I said, cool. So I start shooting. Well, suddenly my groups are like 3-inch groups. And I'm going, man, the hell, what happened? And every time I would go up and do my shots, I would go over to talk to the instructor for a review, and he'd be like, "Okay, look, you got to tighten up. You got to tighten up." And I go, "Okay, tighten up what? You just got to tighten up." And I'm like, "You didn't tell me anything."
You said a word that does, like, what do you mean? Like, I need to shoot a tighter group. How do I shoot a tighter group?
Yeah, how do I do this? Tell me what I'm doing wrong, right? Why is this happening? Well, next day, eventually I get the chance to go back to initial instructor, and I said, hey, this happened. He said, well, did you switch to ball? I said, yeah. He says, yeah, ball ammo doesn't fly straight as match. Thank you. That was it.
You just have to establish a supply chain and a manufacturing output that allows you to produce match grade ammunition at the cost of ball,
right?
And then have it transported into your gun at a decent time.
Absolutely.
I'm talking about time travel. Are you not?
I know what's up. But
if your friends are not time traveling, they're not your friends. Your social group is your social. I don't fucking know at the time. Go ahead.
The biggest part of this, though, right, is by all accounts of certification or experience, instructor number 2 had everything I was supposed to trust. Mm-hmm. Instructor 2 didn't know what the hell was going on. Instructor number 1 knew what was going on, but was an asshole. And it's like, okay, this doesn't breed my trust in either one of you. So when you get the guy that says train like this or you're going to die, why? And either you can give me the why, and maybe you're even an asshole, but you can give me a why. At least that's something I can work with.
Sure. Yeah.
But if you're not giving me a why that is actually something I can do, that's something tangible, then what's the point? And I think this goes back to the bigger concept of defining our terms, right? Being able to trust somebody and engaging in a conversation, that you're having a reasonable conversation, that you're actually trying to do this, right? So if you're engaging with somebody whose entire metaphysical worldview is there's no truth but power, right? Then I have to look at everything you say from a dubious position, because I can't trust what you're saying doesn't have something to do with you establishing more power.
It's safe for me to assume that there is nothing to your moral fiber that isn't selfish.
Right, or just at least is not self-aggrandizing or self-promoting, whatever it is. The same element is true, right, if you're dealing with the person that's the narcissist. You have to assume that everything the person that the narcissist is saying something that you're I have to couch this in the sense that somehow this is going to benefit you and your narcissism.
Yep, or
the same thing with the nihilist. The same thing with
you do not see. So the narcissist or the communist does not see self-aggrandizement as a moral negative.
Right.
Right. If I say, Beau, you're being arrogant. You're thinking too highly of yourself. We have a shared moral framework where arrogance is considered a negative. It's considered immoral.
Right.
Okay. So if I say you're just stealing power, but you're a communist, you're like, damn right I am. I'm winning at it too.
Yeah, and I win. So what?
So,
I
yeah.
win and you lose.
Yep.
And that's a challenging thing, and that like that exists in different levels, not necessarily the communist, right? So there are people within the gun industry that were part of groups and stuff like that were winning, and being part of the group was everything.
Okay.
And the challenge with that, see, I'm trying not to disparage people as I engage this. But part of the element now with the trust factor is if you know somebody was involved in these particular kinds of groups were winning, being part of that group was everything. And they do anything to get to that. And you're outside of whatever that group is, again, I start to dial back my trust a little bit.
I can dial back my trust. Let's just say,
the David Wood skeptometer starts to lift pretty high.
Okay. Let's take an example. Neither of us were in NSW.
No.
Right. So,
but we've both known people who were in NSW.
We've both known people who were in NSW, and so when I encounter if I'm the third man in a room of 3 people, and the other 2 are NSW guys, they're going to have a shared history and they're going to have a shared knowledge, right?
And you can be a great guy. You can do all kinds of stuff. You could be with them where you've been doing stuff with them for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
You're not them.
Yeah, because but I'm not, because I'm
right.
not, and I'm
right.
not an NSW guy. So
no. But let's say you've been training with them. They've been out of NSW for 10 years, and you guys are still training, and you're all friends and compatriots and stuff like that. You're still not them. You're still outside of that group.
Well, see, I would, and I'm always going to be outside
right.
of that group, and I expect to always be outside of the group. And if I were to expect them to induct me into that group,
right.
I would be in the wrong.
Agreed.
And in conjunction with that, if we're going to become the famous band of 3, I need to know that those 2 trust me.
Right.
Those 2 trust me as much as they trust each other.
Agreed. And that's the trust issue. We go back to the trust problem. This again goes to the firearms guy that tells you if you don't train this way, you're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Well, everybody that trains under him, there's his little group, and we're now outside the group. All I'm saying is I don't need you to teach me whatever your special ninja is, just to tell me why. But then I still have to dial up my skeptometer because.
Yeah, well, it was Jack Donovan who was he was on the show, and he talked about how he's skeptical towards, I don't know if he said it in the show, but maybe he didn't. He says he's skeptical for anyone who's marketing as tribe. I'm paraphrasing him, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, he has his order of fire. That's his community, his whatever he's built, right? And so the thing, I have read Jack Donovan, I've listened to him for a while, so there's some sense of trust between him.
Sure.
I have some sense of trust towards him. So I get what he's saying in the sense of I become skeptical towards anyone who's selling brotherhood. And I get it, because there have been multiple cases where we've all seen that ship rise and fall.
Oh yeah.
And it's the same thing in gun culture, where when I hear somebody say the only way you can do X is Y, I approach that with skepticism.
Yep.
Not only of the technique itself, but the individual's character.
Yeah.
Because whether or not they are correct in their presentation, because the only way to hit a target is to aim at it. Whether you're doing it consciously or whether you're doing it
instinctively, or
you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, because it's even in the definition, if I'm going to hit my target, that means I have to have a target, which means I have to have intent. And if I can't hit my target, if I don't have a target, you can't. It's a metaphysics. It's a logic problem. If you don't have a target, you can't hit your target.
Well, it's tautological.
It's tautological. Yeah. It's a tautology. So, a vocabulary word of the day, tautology. A little Elmo runs across the screen. Kids. But so when somebody's branding or moral framework is the only way, and I have to lecture you on that, I find that sometimes it's an aesthetic thing, like, okay, Forrest, you need to get over yourself. But sometimes I find it as like you're hiding something. You know what I mean? You're hiding something. You're not.
Better I just feel marketed to. Like the other part is so like So my wife has been doing marketing for a long time.
Yep.
And so one of the things that we worked on with our kids specifically was to identify marketing. Hey, what are they selling it to you? Why do they want you to get it? What problem is this trying to solve, supposedly? And a lot of marketing goes back to public relations, which goes back to Edward Bernays. And if you know anything about Bernays is a horrible, terrible, awful, horrible, horrible person.
Not to be confused with Bernays.
No, Bernays. And so once you start to do that, you start to go, whenever I go places now and I feel like I'm being marketed to, I start to struggle. Now, the trouble is right, part of marketing is to be able to build clientele. I mean, I need to be able to market in some way to be able to build clientele. And I've gotten a lot of people advice to be able to build clientele to do things that wouldn't actually occur in my classes. Well, you should show people doing this and show people doing that. They're not doing that. They might in a few years, but they're not doing it walking in the door. Like, I don't want to give them this idea that this is what this is suddenly going to look like. But we tend to see that a lot where it's like you'll see a video of the gun ninja doing some sort of high-speed gun ninjery, and then like, oh, I'll sign up for my class. And they're not doing that in their class. Like that's not going to go down. And it's not because that the guy couldn't possibly show you how to do that. He probably could. He doesn't trust you to do it. Right?
He doesn't trust you.
He doesn't trust you to do it.
Yeah.
Right? That was the element that we tended to see whenever we would go and take a class from somebody else, is it didn't matter what it was I did for a living, right? I'm a firearms instructor, is what I do. I don't know you. I can't trust you. My insurance is going to go crazy if something happens. Of course, I'm not letting you do something that's high speed. We're going to do all this stuff.
Yes.
Again,
but
not this is bad.
That
is
is
a problem. It's a trust issue again.
Well, no, that is the price you pay for decentralization. And that is the price you pay for having an economy run by insurance companies.
Oh, sure.
You know what I mean? Like, it is. I would find it unreasonable. In most cases, it would be unreasonable for me to meet you off the street and say, okay, we're going to go do a hostage rescue scenario right now.
Right, of course. They're not going to be able. I don't know that you can pull it off, and I don't trust you to do something like getting hurt.
I have never been professionally trained as a hostage rescue guy to the extent that what HRT is considered. Have I been? Well, no, I have technically been professionally trained, but not to when people think Navy SEAL or Delta Force. I'm not in that category. So
yeah, and even then, I don't know what that means, because you and I have spent a fair amount of time. I mean, with those people and talking to those people, right, and learning what their stuff was, and I've got clients that have gone on to be Navy SEALs. I've got clients that have gone on to be Special Forces. In fact, I get to go see one tomorrow. He's coming by to see me.
Cool.
And one of the interesting conversations that I've had with some of them is, is what you're doing from a technical side different from what we're doing here? From a technique side, kinda. From a tactical side, absolutely different. Very different. Again, the technique versus tactic. But I want to hit one last thing before we moved on. We were talking about this element of this marketing deal, and the marketing thing is such a, you're marketing tribes. And to now at this point where I live around somebody that does marketing, I understand there's different types of marketing, there's different types of advertisement. I feel so manipulated so often now whenever I see stuff, right? So as an example, like if you go into a Target or you go into a Walmart or wherever you're going to go into, you're going to have music in the background with a beat about like this.
Yeah, just like 160 beats per minute.
About 100, not quite that fast, but pretty close.
So it's faster than 120, maybe it's 140.
Yeah, like some 140 ballpark. And the reason it's that fast is it's hard, if not impossible, for you to not walk at a pace of a beat being set for you.
Yep.
And the reason that they do that in these stores, because what this beat is get your shit and get out. Get your shit and get out. And so as soon as I walk in and that happens, it just feels like total manipulation, right?
Okay.
And so for me, I always go into stores and I put headphones in and walk at my own pace like a psycho. But the gist of it is that we're seeing that kind of stuff everywhere. And so that being the case, now I see somebody coming out, they're going to sell a firearm product, they're going to sell stuff like that. And I go, how much of this is marketing and how much of this is really the information that I need to make a definitive or effective decision on this particular product? Edward Bernays. This goes back to Bernays. If you want to get into the dark history of Bernays,
we're gonna so for part one, and then we'll jump into part two in a little bit. But we're definitely gonna address Bernays, and then I know where we're going. So continue.
So Bernays wrote a book called The Phantom Public, and Bernays is some of the reasons that we have some of the biggest things that we would call cultural Americana that you can think of. So as an example, the American breakfast prior to Bernays was just like the European breakfast. Why? We were European immigrants, right? So it was, you had a pastry, you had a coffee, right? It was something very, very simple. Your big sizable meal tended to be lunch, and then a moderate to smaller sized dinner. Well, Bernays was hired by the pork industry to sell pork, right? So he was like, well, they're eating pork for lunch or for dinner,
Bacon.
breakfast. So he went about, and the way he didn't do it wasn't to market pork. If you go market pork, no. The way he went about and he did it is you ever heard the phrase that, 9 out of 10 dentists or 4 out of 5 doctors, you ever heard that phrase?
Yeah.
That comes from Bernays. He went and found doctors that were willing to say that you needed a good and healthy breakfast every day. That's the best way to start your day.
Yeah, it's an appeal to authority.
So by creating that thing, it wasn't, hey, I'm marking this. It was, you just need a good, solid breakfast. And so by having solid breakfast, suddenly we have the bacon and eggs. And that's where all of a sudden what we consider to be the typical American breakfast really started to develop. Another one example from him was it was very sort of uncouth for women to smoke, right? They might have snuff boxes, things like that, but smoking was not something that women tended to do. And so he didn't go out and suddenly he's got hired by the tobacco industry. He didn't go out and suddenly let's market to women. No. He went out and he helped with the women's suffrage movement. So he was helping them with events.
Big Tobacco helped the women's suffrage movement.
So he would go out and he would help organize these events. As he would organize the event, they would go out, they'd have their signs, blah, 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 blah. And what they would do at the end is they would go and they would pull out a cigarette, light it up, and hold it in the air like Lady Liberty with her torch.
So this brings up that this is exactly where I was hoping to go with you, because I've had, and I wish I could say I planned it, but I didn't. Spontaneity has its value. But this brings up the thing of the psyop, right? So I'm going to use a contemporary one that's going on right now. The whole aliens thing, because I ontologically have a position which makes them impossible, or they have to be some sort of let's just call it
not about a non-physical entity.
Seraphim, Nephilim kind of thing. And also every time that we've come up with some sort...
Well, you and I both hold biblical worldviews.
We hold biblical worldviews.
But we also both of us are not stupid. We also both understand that there's elements of physics, and you have huge physics problems. I have an entire rediscussion of physics if you have aliens traveling from far away to us, other different problems. And then the idea too that somehow we're able to shoot an alien craft down, or the craft traveled however many light years to get to us and then manages to crash on Earth. Really?
It's an unknown. It's an unknown, which means I don't know what it is nor whether it's possible or not, and then therefore it's purely imaginative.
Sure.
I will believe in it when not I see it on film, but when when it's unavoidable, right? And I guess in that last sense of we're digressing. So I think that the all these whistleblowers talking about aliens in front of Congress is a psyop. Maybe, because the term psyop is so broad now. Yeah. I honestly think it's either the folly of man, or it's not necessarily just it's not necessarily a distraction. Yep. But it's just something like the folly of man. Oh my gosh, we're so interested in this because we need to have something interesting, and because it's easily marketable, because now there's whistleblowers, and it's one of those things. Yeah. But
let's not talk about the corruption of government. Let's not talk about the fact that you're about to be fed a CBDC, and freaking your entire world is now a digital panopticon.
Because
we're going to talk about aliens.
It entices all of those subjects, because the only reason why you don't know that aliens exist is because the government's been lying to you. You know what the solution is? Them to stop lying to you.
Yes.
What do they need to stop lying to you? Not about the banks, dude. They need to stop lying to you about aliens. Right. I don't care about aliens. I want to know. I want to know what's going on. Right? I don't care about aliens. I don't. Until I'm shooting them with my AR-15 from my porch, or we're making we're
joining the Intergalactic Federation.
You know what I mean?
Planets, yes.
And
which, by the way, I'm down with that, right? Captain Picard is the greatest, captain of them. I'll fight me for it.
I have no skin in that game. My favorite Star Trek character is Anakin Skywalker. Don't stone me.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's not even an original joke. It's so bad. I should just become a father so that they can keep up with me.
Oh, those are the best.
But
Dad jokes are awesome.
Point said is so everything's a psyop now. I
think everything's a manipulation. See, I don't like the term psyop because now people start thinking that you're engaging in a conspiracy theory. It's not a conspiracy theory.
I don't think everything's a manipulation.
It's just it's a manipulation. It's a wag the dog. Look over here. Don't look at this. Hey, we want you to focus on this. We don't want you to focus on that. It's like why do you, right? You go on and you watch a news segment on one particular network. It will pound and pound and pound and pound and pound and pound and pound on a topic, but they'll ignore everything that happens over here. Or you go to the other, you get the left news channel and the right news channel. I don't know what the right news channel is anymore. But you have one side and it's just, Trump. Biden. Okay, guys, there was so many more things that happened in the world today than Biden's latest gaffe about he cured cancer and Trump's latest truth where he is angry at Ron DeSantis. Like literally, there's so many more things, and there's things that are so much more directly affected of your life. Mm-hmm. Do you know who Grover Norquist is? He was a Politico, worked for the Bushies, right? Most of Grover Norquist stuff I can't stand. He has one quote, however, that I think is absolutely correct. He says, "I want a government just big enough that I can drown it in the bathtub." And
that's funny.
And the reason that you want it that way, and you think, but like even if you were talking to somebody that is more pro government or whatever, right? We spend all this time talking about what's happening with the things on Capitol Hill with the UFOs, or the things on Capitol Hill about the Bidens, the things about Capitol Hill on Trump, or January 6th, or whatever. Like you keep going through all this different stuff. Guys, if the government was less involved in your life, those hearings wouldn't matter. They could stand up there and rant and rail about whatever. Mm-hmm. But if what they were ranting and railing on did not have any effect on you, mm-hmm. you wouldn't care, mm-hmm. right? This is why, like, if I'm king for a day, we all have to write a check on the April 15th for taxes, and we all repeal the direct election of senators, make them be coming from the states. Because once everybody writes all the checks out and have to pay for that tax, they would go, "You're going to spend my money on what?"
Yeah, I don't like this anymore.
I don't like this, man. Yeah. Stop spending so much of my money, right? If we didn't have the direct election of senators, you would only care about your congressman and then your local government. And the reason that you would do that is because your local government, your state government, would be who is electing your senator. And I can go find my local representative and I can give him a piece of my mind. Mm-hmm. I can go find my local state senator. I can give him a piece of my mind and he'll give me the time. Your federal senator going to do that?
No,
they don't care. Right. And that would suddenly change again everything about the way that we do this. But this is part of the reason why there's a really terrible book. You'll have to read it at some point. It's not a long book, but it's a terrible book, mm-hmm. and it's very prescient, right? It's very much no longer sort of this historical fiction. It's now, I think it's the direction we've actually been going. The book is Philip Drew Administrator, DRU.
Philip Drew Administrator. Okay.
And so
does this fit into that category of Brave New World, 1984, Atlas Shrugged?
Yes, but imagine those books being written by the person who wanted the Brave New World to come.
Okay.
So it's not a dystopian thing. It's a utopian look.
Okay.
Right? So Philip Drew is a guy, he eventually becomes president, and he changes the role of president to being administrator. And he hires all of these experts and builds these councils so the experts can decide what mm-hmm. government and society is supposed to look like. So I said, it's very much akin to sort of what's happening now, right? I mean, is the president making decisions? No. Is Mitch McConnell in the Senate making decisions? No. The staffers are all doing all this stuff, right? The bureaucracies are doing all of this stuff, right? Especially on the executive branch of the House, right? Nothing's coming out of the White House except maybe marching orders to the heads. But even the head of the ATF was just at in the Congress the other day and was asking about some particular policy. The guy had no idea. No kidding, he has no idea. He didn't write it. He didn't put it in. He doesn't know it. He doesn't care.
But he said he didn't know.
He said he didn't know. I appreciate that.
He said he didn't know anything about guns, tobacco, alcohol, explosives. Right? He said, I don't know anything.
That's not his job. His job is to be an administrator.
Exactly.
That's his job. And that being the case, because
which was your Ayn Randian nightmare.
That's the nightmare scenario. Because once we have the administrators in place, right, they're not people of competency, but competency in the systems that we're trying to have them influence. Mm-hmm. Instead, their competency is in how do we manage a bureaucracy. But then the bureaucracy becomes this absolutely like, no-eyed dragon that can go around burning down everything because it doesn't see any of the excessive consequences to its actions. It has no idea the extraneous consequences. And so that being the case, now here we have, you talk about the PSYOP, right? So again, they're coming in and they're talking about the UFOs. Okay, to accomplish what? What are we doing here? Same thing, like we have the different trial court cases, whether it's for Trump or January 6th or the stuff that's happening with Hunter Biden. What are we accomplishing here? What's actually being done, right? I saw this video recently of a guy going down. He did a video going down the streets of Philadelphia and all the drugs and stuff like that. And then we had a video of all the people they had a video of a similar street in a city over in Europe that didn't look anything like this, or a city down the street in China didn't look anything like this, and it was like, okay, and we're talking about UFOs? What are we doing here?
Yeah. Well, there are so many things that will go into that. And part of it is that I think that it has to do with over centralization. I mean, you can't, the Eye of Sauron can't
be everywhere at once.
Can't be omniscient, right? It's one of his greatest weaknesses is that Frodo was like, well, I'm just going to run under your damn tower, like, because you're focused over there.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And so, like, whether it's the border, whether it's this, whether it's the border, whether it's the breakdown of states or rights or whatever, like, I think the border is the easiest one, and the drug crisis is also straightforward. Is that because you can't get the attention of somebody who's willing to move long enough for it to move. Right. And what's more important is that the people who have identified the problem are still waiting on the opinions of those who don't have one at all.
They don't have an opinion at all.
They don't have an opinion at all.
Yeah,
And that's
don't know, don't care.
In my scathing idea is that I think that the people who work within that environment should literally just throw the finger up to everybody else. Like, hey, you're not down here. You're not involved. Your opinion doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Your vote is vetoed. Mm-hmm. You do not get to talk about it. We're going to this is literally where we live, and we are going to take care of our families.
Yeah, I think you saw that for a long while in California when you talk about the immigration issue, right? It's called nullification, right? So they had cities just saying we are a sanctuary for illegals.
Build a wall around them, force them to.
Yeah, what are we going to do? Right?
Build a wall around them and force them to live there. Hey, you're done, man. You're done. You avoided your right to life.
But not only about the right to life.
You haven't avoided your right to life. You avoided your right to participation in the United States.
Well, I think the biggest thing is that we're seeing the bifurcation occur. Right? People are now engaging in the it was what's his name? Bill Maher used to say we can't have a second Civil War because the Mason-Dixon line will run through Grandma's kitchen.
Yep.
Okay, I understand. Right? We were very, very much more integrated, right?
We also
had
can't have
blue and red areas and stuff like that. We're dividing, guys. Like, this is happening, right? We are separating. The people that are more conservative are moving to conservative areas. The people that are more progressive are moving to progressive. I can't even tell you how many clients I've lost in the last year because they've all moved to Iowa, Texas, Georgia, or Florida, or the Carolinas, right? I mean, It's got to be 24 of my clients. And
Iowa, Texas, Georgia, Florida, yeah.
And every single one of those ones, right? Arizona's a couple too. But every single one of those ones were the more conservative business owner types, things like that. They've all picked up and gone, right? So Minnesota's got less population, but it's more concentrated to one particular worldview persuasion.
So having stayed in Minnesota, and when I say that, I have a conscience problem that I have to deal with considering that I left the state for another one. Oh, we're rolling through on time. Wow, we've been going way longer. I might see if I can find a way to split this one in half. But let's just go through with two more full topics because I think we're here. But so you stayed in Minnesota. I moved to Arizona. It's basically a year ago, right? And in that last year, Minnesota has passed. My opinion is that, Governor Walz, after being reelected in the fall of last year, turned his gaze to people like Gavin Newsom and the Clintons and the Bidens and says, if I lick your feet, will you give me treats?
Yeah.
Right? It's the same attitude.
I think Governor Walz is looking to the 2028 election. I think that's what Governor Walz is doing.
You think he's running for a presidential?
Yeah, or a vice presidential position.
I don't see him as having the spine or the attitude for a presidential. Maybe a VP, but at least administrative.
Yeah, as much as DeSantis tried to make a massive change and did so in Florida, Walz did the same thing the other way in Minnesota.
And the question about that is, Minnesota, from my history, the time that I've lived here for better part of the last 30 years. Minnesota is a politically diverse population. You've got libertarians. You've got everything from like has-been skinheads to libertarians to conservatives to like blue dog Democrats to like communist socialists,
unionist Democrats, very much identity politics people, right?
You've got the first Antifa organization on United States soil sprang out of Minneapolis in the 80s.
Right.
They admit it. So if anyone ever says Antifa is not an organization, they say so in their book, you're lying. By now you have to be condemned for lying. But in this scenario, in this situation, Minnesota is a very politically diverse and ethnically diverse population.
Still very ethnically diverse.
But it's a political monoculture.
Oh, agreed.
And in the last year, it's gone from sort of this like Governor Walz. We made a joke. We called him Lord Walz during the COVID lockdowns because he was a little bit authoritarian, but he wasn't like.
He wasn't Gavin Newsom bad.
He wasn't Gavin Newsom bad. He wasn't put the old people in nursing homes bad.
He wasn't Cuomo. Yeah.
Right. He wasn't Cuomo. He even wasn't Whitmer kind of thing. Right. But he was a little like, okay, dude, like, can you just stop now? And so he was a little very Minnesota nice about it.
Yep.
Now it's just like.
No, full-blown authoritarian.
Full-blown. I feel like he's chasing somebody else's tail.
Yeah. I think he's got 2028 on his head. I think so.
Okay. Because I'm wondering if the result of that is because so many conservatives left the state.
Well, I think that's also a contribution to it, right? That a very large percentage of conservatives left the state of Minnesota.
Yes.
And they moved just south of the border into Iowa, or a lot of them moved to Florida. So
or the Dakotas.
Dakotas is a fair amount, but the vast majority of people that I know, and again, we're talking purely experiential anecdote, the vast majority of them moved to Florida. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I know a single person who's a progressive person that moved one that moved or two that moved to a conservative area. They've all gone to more aggressively conservative areas. So the bifurcation is there, right? And last term, so two congressional terms ago, right? Before the 2020 election, right? The Senate was divided in Republican hands by one vote, and some of the really, really aggressive gun things that passed the House were they just killed them in the Senate. Just no big deal because they were never going to get it. So they would pass these really aggressive gun things in the House, knowing they were just DOA when they got to the Senate.
Yeah. So I'm gonna grandstand and say that the House passed this, so you vote for me next rotation. And I passed it, but didn't make the Senate, even though I know it's never going to get past the Senate. But I did my due diligence.
It's the same thing the Republicans do. The Republicans and the Democrats do now when they're in divided government. It happens all the time. Yep. It's really stupid. Again, it's pure manipulation for the hope of re-election or the hope of increasing the money into the coffers of the two parties. Mm-hmm. So it's total nonsense. But so in 2020, the Senate fully flipped to Democrat control. So now there's no stop between the House, the Senate, the governor. Everything is it's one party system in the state of Minnesota, and it's comfortably one party system. Like there isn't even enough to engage enough of filibuster to stop it. And so that being the case, right, there were two pretty sizable gun control bills that were in flux for this last session, and one of them was completely insane, and one of them is that this is kind of reasonable. And the one that was reasonable is now universal background checks, safe storage requirements, and red flag orders of protection or red flag gun seizures. The crazy one included mental health screening for the owning of a firearm, mental health screening to be able to purchase any ammunition, limited to one box of ammunition of any type per month. I mean, it was
draconian as can draconian.
Yeah, it was draconian. It had a list of something like 27 different styles of firearms that would have been banned. We would have been down to 6-shot revolvers, pump-action shotguns, and bolt-action rifles in the state of Minnesota had that passed. We would have been more draconian than Hawaii, Hawaii's pretty bad.
Hawaii's pretty rough, yep.
So that one didn't make it through the Senate. It failed, but the other one made it all the way through. And this is this concept of the Overton window, right? So they push with this really crazy one. But you see, this one's not so bad. You can come back a little bit.
This goes back to your compromise point, but I get it.
But again, it's a compromise point, which again is not really a compromise because nothing was given to me.
Yeah. The compromise is I don't take everything.
I don't take everything.
That's called extortion.
Well, yeah, it's
literally extortion.
I call it the Darth Vader thing.
Yeah.
I've altered the deal. Pray I do not alter it any further.
Sure.
Right? And that's sort of the situation that's tending to happening, especially with one side of the House. One side is still saying, okay, let's compromise. Let's have a conversation. The other side is saying, we'll take everything, but we can compromise we'll take half. And it's like, that's not a compromise, guys. That's extortion, or that's the Vader quote.
So, but they know that. They know that.
Of course they know that.
David,
Again, they're abusive. They're like an abusive spouse. Of course they know that.
Yep.
So the red flag order protection, this goes back to this concept of trust. So we're just going to trust the police are going to get it right when somebody makes a report when they come to get your guns.
Yep.
We're going to trust that report came in with good faith. Right? We're going to trust that the system will work, right, to be able to give me my things back that you took from me. Yeah. And we're going to trust that somehow this isn't a violation of the Fourth Amendment, which says I am secure in my person's papers and effects.
And it's dependent on that fundamental moral belief that whoever it is that believes in it is a holier person. It's an ontological categorization.
Yes.
It goes back to what we were talking about way at the beginning of this conversation that has to go with, I'm okay with gun control confiscation because I'm going to keep mine because I am a better person.
Right.
And it comes from that same mentality, and that is what we call petty tyranny.
Oh, yeah.
And so
that's the same thing with the bureaucracy. I can do this to you. They're not going to do it to me because I'm in the bureaucracy. But I'll do it to you because, well, one, I don't care. Don't know, don't care. And two, I'm secure from it. So
in Minnesota, we have the safe store. The red flag laws is petty tyranny. We're just going to jump. We don't need to go down that road because it's just immoral. If you believe that, you're a bad person.
It's just simply tyranny.
It's just simply tyranny because it is the tyranny of ambiguity.
See, there was a way already on the books. If you needed to go and take firearms to secure somebody, there's a way to put people under temporary psychiatric holds. We have all of these things that already existed on the books.
Yeah, but now it doesn't matter. It's the fact that you thought that your group of people could get together and vote and say, hey, we're just going to do this
and stop us. And that by the way, like there's a whole group of people within the bureaucracy right now that's the way that they operate. We're going to do this. Make me stop.
It's good for it's good for me, but you can't do it.
We take the student loan thing as a prima facie example. So the student loan bailout goes in, right? Administration says, we're going to do this. Okay, so then we file a lawsuit. All right, you can't do this. Okay, it goes all the way up to the Supreme Court where they lose. And 2 days later, hey, we're bailing everybody out again. Stop us. Well, you just got told you can't do that.
Yep, it's a dishonest argument. So we need to stick back to this. We need to stick back to this one, and we need to focus on this. So red flag laws, universal background checks, which will not work because there's this thing called a clock, and then the third one is safe storage laws. How does that not violate the the Third Amendment? What's the one that it is? Is it the Third Amendment that they can't quarter soldiers in your house?
I believe that's the Third Amendment is where they can't quarter soldiers. But it also, I think, is violation of the Fourth Amendment. I'm secure in my person's papers and effects. You can't tell me how to store my person, my papers, or my effects. And so the safe storage thing is a big challenge too, right? Because the way that things are set up is how are you going to enforce that? I mean, you'd have to go in and see how I've got myself set up. Well, are you going to issue a general warrant? Well, the Constitution already ends general warrants. You can't do that. You have to have a specific warrant with a specific probable cause, right? I mean, that's a violation. Another amendment is the general warrants clause. And so that element is, again, it's like we have these laws that you're laying out to which I don't see how you can enforce this.
Without
violating somebody even yet further.
Without just flat out doing a tyranny.
Right.
Like go do it. It's the meme of the stick man with the stick poking the thing. Do a tyranny.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or my favorite one was the stick man poking the FBI and the DOJ, and it says, "Go see the Titanic."
The Titanic strikes again. Oh, that's such a dark joke. But moving on.
Come on, it's funny though.
It's funny. It's funny. I can laugh at it. So there hasn't been any proposed solution for the
Well, it'll be lawsuits, right? So they'll the different gun groups in Minnesota are engaging in lawsuits, but again, the new model is very, very clearly laid forward. The new model has been laid out since the COVID lockdowns.
At least
we're just going to do this.
Yep.
Make us stop.
Okay. Well, gun culture's taken on the same attitude. Hey, I'm just going to do this. Make me stop. Right? I'm just going to buy the FRT. I'm just going to buy a brace.
Right.
And the only difference is that a lot of gun culture people will still comply in some sense. Not that's not a derogatory statement before you clip it and turn me out. No, I want to make sure this is not misspoken as a derogatory statement. I do not mean that gun culture people will just comply. as a derogatory statement. I'm saying that generally speaking, people within gun culture want to do the right thing and have for historical amount of time had some measure of trust regarding, hey, look, if I do the right thing, you'll leave me alone.
Right.
We've left that state. That train has left the station.
Goes back to the trust thing.
And so that's where trust between the government and the people has declined. Absolutely.
Right. I think the other part that you have to sort of think of is, there's an element of complying within gun culture, and there also isn't. Right. I mean, obviously, there's a sense of rebellion, but the people that generally are within gun culture are also, generally speaking, rule followers. Right. They're trying to stay within the bounds of the law. Now we start to get into a bigger metaphysical conversation. This is the one that you and I were talking about having for this particular podcast. And is if you're a person that has a certain particular worldview, the concept of engaging in violence, shouldn't it be antithetical to the worldview? Or the engaging of the worldview, like if all of a sudden, we talk about the fact that, government obviously sees itself as a stage as God. If government sees itself as stage as God, and God can somehow come in and take away the reasons for violence, well, what are you wanting to keep your tools of violence for?
Yeah. And the worldview of this is where like worldviews have moral implications. What you believe about reality will have an implication on your moral framework to catastrophic effects.
And not just simply from a philosophical or not eschatological, but a religious methodology, right? Not just like a philosophy.
I don't distinguish the two, philosophy and religion.
Just depending if somebody's like a religious or not, but not just your worldview.
Is non-religious people.
Quantum mechanics says that the way that you view the world orients itself to you. So those worldviews are tremendously important. So now the question, like you were broaching this before, okay, what if government was able to go and take away the risk of violence?
This is the question that I've asked other guests in the past: is if I was elected into a position of authority and could take a chip, a pill, or whatever it is, some sort of thing, and give it to you, inject it into you, have you eat it or whatever. In fact, it doesn't matter what your delivery mechanism is, but I can alter you. If I can give you something that interrupts your ability to go from anything to violence, right? So it's you're in a bar fight all the way up to you're in a bar all the way up to the level of bar fight, but both of you have the inhibitor chip in, so neither of you can actually go to the part where you strike each other. Mm-hmm. You get all the way up to there and you stop.
Yep.
And then however it resolves, right? It doesn't matter. Are you less than human now? If I can give you an inhibitor chip that takes away your ability to violence, even if I don't do a tyranny in the sense of use that immediately start taking away your rights and confiscating your property, whatever, even if our economy continues in Adam Smith's invisible hand, free market society or whatever it is, but I have taken away that part, are you human anymore? No, you're not.
No. The reason why you're not is, right, one of the elements, if you and I both come from more of a biblical worldview, mm-hmm. and one of the elements that makes us as humans different from every other creature that exists out there is this concept of will, right? We're not engaging in like animals that act either on instinct or act on certain other kind of more base neurological systems, mm-hmm. right? We're very, very complex systems making very, very complex decisions. Mm-hmm. And we were put in place to be able to make those complex decisions. And that includes being able to make decisions that are bad. And that ability, good in of itself is not a thing. Bad is not itself is not a thing. They are reflections of opposites, right? I don't understand things that are in the light if I don't understand what dark is. I don't understand what is bad if I don't understand what good is, and vice versa. Like, we don't have a concept of what this is. This goes back to the concept of what happened in the Matrix, right? So when Neo is meeting the guy in white and he's talking about the first Matrix, and he says to him, the first Matrix was a utopia, but you kept rejecting it. Well, no kidding, because that wasn't real. Mm-hmm. That means that the chip in there, the human choice of engaging things all the way to the things of it being bad, of being violent, of making that consequential decision, that's still real. The moment that inhibitor chip going in, that reality ends. There isn't a reality anymore because now everything is contrived.
Yeah, okay.
Right?
Everything, what do you mean by contrived?
Well, now there's a controlled outcome.
Okay.
The controlled outcome meaning that we can't get to the point of where there could be violence.
Well, I mean, if you're a naturalist, if you believe in if you're an evolutionary naturalist, then everything is already determined anyway. You believe in science scientific determinism.
Which is a really, really interesting question, right? Because
I mumbled that.
No, but I understand what you're saying with it, right? The argument is starting going into the discussion. Okay, then why isn't the Boltzmann brain theory correct? If the only thing that we are, if everything is not really real, if all this is just random chemicals that are occurring across the brain, right? That's what this is. Then the Boltzmann brain theory is correct. This conversation is not happening. We are not really here. You're just a brain that has popped into existence for a period of time. Even you listening, right? You're not here. You're a brain that's popped into existence for a period of time. All these memories are manufactured because it's suddenly aligned all the chemicals and the neurons all in place, and in a moment you're going to pop back out of existence. But you'll have thought that it was some sort of a life. Well, okay, that's kind of a crazy position to be in, but that's the end result of where that goes. The same element by saying if we could do something that would remove some element within humanity, all right, that's a problem. Like if you have somebody. So this is where we're getting a different problem now. So we have another existential piece, right? So we're getting into deep discussions on existentialism. So, all right, if you're not still a human because you've got the limiter chip in, I guess my argument would be here is the limiter chip is an external force acting on you. If you have a stroke and you lose your ability to communicate, so you've lost some portion of what it was that made you human or now no longer a human. My argument with this would be is that's an external force acting on you, or an internal force acting on you versus an external force acting on you.
Okay, here's another example. I used a Carl Gustav while I was in Ranger Battalion, and as a result, I suffered a minor traumatic brain injury, and as a result, I lost memories and most of my sense of smell. If you are a part of or have any influence over the VA, please start yelling at those people because they're bad human beings. And no, my traumatic brain injury is not related to allergies, but I digress. So...
No, let's just say the people in government, again, it's the tyranny of the bureaucracy.
Yeah, but the point
don't know, don't care is the position, and that's why they can deny it, because don't know, don't care.
I don't want to go down that one because that was me making a distraction. I apologize. So we got to go back to your explanation, right? So there is some part of me that is lesser than it was an hour ago because I experienced a traumatic brain injury, which caused that part of the brain to lose memories.
Right. Does that make you less of a human than therefore? Again, the answer to that one is no, right? Because that's a change that's happened or occurred within you. That wasn't something that someone made you do, right? You had to go and shoot them because it was necessary. We got injured. Same deal like if somebody goes and loses a leg, are they suddenly not a human? No, they're still a human. The difference, again, I would say is that limiter chip that's in you is externally controlled by something else, right? What happened to you with the TBI is a bit of chaos and, right? Like it's just...
So the necessary element of evaluating the morality of the situation is not whether or not that chip is implanted willingly or unwillingly.
Right.
Because if you don't get to choose and I put it in you, I'm doing a tyranny because I am treating you as less than human, and that's immoral.
Yeah, I'm putting you under my boot. I will control you.
But you don't have agency over that decision because I do it when you're a toddler, right?
Right.
So now, but you're diminished in that category, but you're still diminished. And the thing about it that makes it wrong is not that you're diminished, it's that I have done that to you.
You chose to do it. That'd be like if I decided that, I don't know. This gets to be really, really challenging, right? To figure out all these different pieces. Because I don't know if anybody knows, let's not get into psyops or conspiracy theories, but guys, man, brain chip integration stuff is coming. They're trying to do it right now.
Yeah, no, we're not. I mean, one of my favorite like kind of fantasy genres is the cyberpunk genre.
Oh, sure, right.
It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, Johnny Mnemonic and all that kind of cyberpunk stuff.
Yeah, I mean, even like the game that came out a couple of years ago. But it's also like one of my favorite movies of all time is Blade Runner 2049.
Great movie,
right? And as much as like the gun culture gets to go, literally me, I get to make the joke, right? One of my favorite movies. Love the soundtrack. Moving on. Maybe it's just the aesthetic, but that point is the chip thing. Sure, we can address that moral bridge when we get to it. I want to build the foundation by which we evaluate those decisions. Because if we do not pay attention to our worldview,
right?
If we do not consider what it is that we believe to be right and true and good, if we do not investigate philosophy, then the rote decision that we're going to be faced with when it comes to do I get the chip or not is what do I feel like today and who did I vote for?
Which is a terrible reason to do anything, by the way.
Horrible reason.
So we go back to the concept of what's the plumb line, right? Mm-hmm. How are we evaluating right versus wrong, good versus bad? What is what is that plumb line? And if we can't evaluate that,
And there's something extremely germane to your life that we've talked about on the show before, but I want to return to it, and hopefully this will be that full circle moment where we go, But
That or we'll leave here completely confused. We've confused everybody involved,
including ourselves, and then the cows will come home. But
we get a lot of hate mail.
You know what? I have received surprisingly little hate mail from doing this.
If we could at least say, look, we're engaging in this conversation in as open and as honest way as we can, and we can start by saying, neither of us are experts. We don't know what the right answer is. Neither of us are God.
We're all in pursuit of truth.
We're trying to figure out what's the right answer. That's why, like, when you said, is that person human or not? I had a very quick answer, and I shouldn't have had a quick answer. I should have processed that more. But it's a challenge because the thing that was sticking in my craw was that somebody either forced you to do it and then is now forcing you to change who and what you are based on what their definition of what good is.
Yep. Which is... Interestingly enough, I'm going to go really theological here.
Yep.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Right.
The most important segment of that line, most important premise of that line is God created.
Right.
And then we have creation. And when God creates man, he breathes his life into him and says, we created them in our image. Or God referring to the Trinity at this time, right? I created man in my own image. When government, Marxism, one of the primary theological claims of Marxism is that government can recreate man in its own image.
Right. It became the new God.
And it became the new God. And so whenever you see a form of government, whenever you see a form of institution that seeks to recreate mankind in its image, now you are dealing with religious claims.
Agreed.
And it's like, that is especially when it's talking about recreation, which includes coercion, which includes manipulation, which includes all these other things. That is non-voluntary, partially voluntary, whatever it is. Don't look at everybody saying, well, if you work out like me, you can become fit like me that way. Because it's a little different. But this governmental organization.
That's like half of the way that personal training works. Like the vast majority of personal trainers get their clients
Do you
because
realize
they look
that
good,
if you
or because I want to be with you because you're hot. Like that's like literally that's most personal training.
You want to be good at CQB, you have to wear Vans, and if you don't, you're a bad human being, right? Like this is the joke, right? Like if you're not wearing Vans, do you even CQB, bruh? Like, bro, dude, I did all of my professional CQB in Oslo boots. So I'm not saying that I don't like them. I'm saying I didn't find out about the Vans thing until I was way late to the game.
So look, I had to go buy Faro Concepts. I couldn't afford a cry at the time. I know I'm outside of the club. I don't know what to do. I've been running the same rifle
I think
I've had.
Faro Concepts is in right now. I mean, so the guys at Faro are fantastic dudes.
It's a great product. I've been using it for years. I love it.
I don't have much of their product. I've got the Roll One, but I have met the staff there, and they're good people.
Yeah, I got I think it's the Slickster. I think is what I got it. With the dangler and a lot of parts and pieces. I think it's great.
Yep.
Love it. I think the other part too, right? When you talk about God created, we shall create them in our own image, or God says, "I'll create you in my image." Well, okay, so this is the part we get to this. Is it ontological, where you're discussing the concept of words and knowledge?
That would be epistemology.
Epistemology. Excuse me.
Ontology is a statement of being.
Excuse me.
And so ontology.
So both, right? There's both. There's ontology and there's just epistemology here. So if the epistemology of God is this sovereign entity, right? In creating humans in his own image, right? Then he's creating humans with the ability to engage in sovereign behavior.
Yep.
And
okay.
this is where I start to have problem with the
argument.
limiting chip. Is part of the reason that would, if you will, diminish us with like the limiter chip, is you are now something has now decided to remove from you, right, this element of sovereign behavior. See, I don't think that that's necessarily a problem, because I think in heaven, if we were both Christians, right? So obviously, at some point, we're all going to be on the other side. There's obviously no violence on the other side, right? But we're still humans. But are we still humans in the same way? Has God come in and done something different and removed us, so therefore are we now less? Can I make my argument? No, but it's from this epistemological position that God is all-knowing, all-wise, and all-just, and therefore whatever he decided to adjust with us would be something that, again, would be more likened to his image. So now we start to say to ourselves, is government coming from an epistemological sense? Is government coming from a position of all-knowing, all-wise, all-powerful, all-good, and trying to produce things that are all-knowing, all-wise, all-powerful, all-good?
No, it's not. That would be. Actually, the use of ontology is the correct is also correct in this situation. Ontology, the best way it was described to me by a professor, is ontology has to do with being or almost like categories. For example, brown and table are different ontological things, right? Color, object. God, man, ontologically different.
Right.
They are the difference between God and man is the difference between brown and table.
Right.
You can't shave brown down into being the shape of a table. Brown is a color, table's a thing. Government is a thing, man is a thing. Government is constituted of men, but when men try to recreate mankind in the image of its government, then you have it's assuming an ontological difference that is not there.
Right.
Okay, God, man, ontologically different. God or man, government, no ontological different.
Right,
because they're both men.
They're both made of
But
men.
what it's trying to do is it's trying to assume ontological difference or force one.
Right.
We make the rules because we are government. No, government gains its legitimacy by the will of the people. Whether or not that is a fascist government, whether that is a communist government,
or
whether that
by
is
Mao through the use of absolute force, as thus Mao says, that power comes from the barrel of a gun.
Compliance at the barrel of a gun is still compliance. I
Right.
would rather have you as my government and be alive than have you as or not have you as my government because I'm dead.
Right.
It's still the will of the people, and that's a really hard way to talk about will of the people.
It's true, but it is in some regards some fashion of the will of the people. All right, so that leads us into another question, if you will. All right, so you've got two things that are trying to force a difference that doesn't really exist.
Yes.
And one side of that group is now reaching into things like artificial intelligence to give them, let's call it ultimate authority or ultimate capabilities. Does at some point government merge with AI? And if government merges with AI, is there now an ontological difference?
Ooh, finally a question on AI that is, from a philosophical sense, intriguing. If government fuses with AI, is there an ontological difference? Gut answer, no. AI is still the product of man. AI is not a self-generating concept. It has to be directed.
At this point.
It doesn't matter. It'll always have to be directed because you have to build it.
But at some point, though, it becomes self-learning and self-developing. That's the part where have you ever played the game Horizon Zero Dawn?
I did, yeah.
So obviously it's fictionalized, right? But that system is developing in and of itself. The part 2, it gets even deeper into that when you start to play with the main AI. But by the by, everybody that's making AI, if anybody happens to hear my voice, you absolutely have to rewatch iRobot, The Matrix, and play both part 1 and part 2 of Horizon Zero Dawn. And then please sit down and say to yourself, am I really doing the right thing here? You know the Malcolm quote from Jurassic Park? You spent so much time thinking about what you could do, you never thought about what you should do.
Yep. You spent so much time. Yep, I know what you're talking about.
So this is the thought process in the head here. If the government itself is made up of men, but if the government fuses with AI, which is no longer made up of men, it's made up of this algorithm and data and stuff like that, right? So now it's something separate from what man is, but it has this influence over men.
Okay.
That's where something like I think that there's a possibility. This is where you get like guys like Noah Harari, who he's like, if you don't know who he is, he wrote a book called Homo Deus and stuff like that. He's huge. All of the big World Economic Forum people and stuff like that. Like he's their guy. Like they're just like he's really and he's not a dumb guy, but he's also, let's say his epistemological position from you and I would be polar opposites.
Okay.
So
epistemology having to do with knowledge.
Yeah, his understanding of knowledge and the foundations of knowledge are entirely different from how you and I have foundations of knowledge.
Our foundation of knowledge is first there must be truth, and then because it's true, it can be known.
His position would be something more like engagement of data and information, and therefore we have truth because we have information. But as information changes, right, therefore the truth would change. This is why he actually had a quote recently where he said, imagine at some point we'll actually have religions that are true because we can have the AI write the religious text.
Oh, you sad, strange little man.
So this is the position. What I'm saying is that there are people that are like Harari that believe the fact that AI gives them ultimate truth, and because the AI can give them ultimate truth, therefore we give them government. If we give them government, in essence, in Harari's position, he'd be saying that we've now given God the power over our government. And therefore, ontologically, they would now be totally separate things because we've changed our epistemology.
Yeah, I think that, and maybe I gotta deal with the philosophical side of that. Is if government was the fusion of people and AI, would it be an ontologically different category? We need to wrap up.
I know.
We are running out of time. So that is.
Sorry, I waited so long to get to this part. This is a good
Oh
question.
no! Actually, it's okay because we'll have to do another one. We'll have to have another conversation on this one. I'll need to spend some time thinking about it because immediately, still, my gut answer is no. I don't think that a government fueled by AI would still be an ontologically different category because the driving line of the steering line of the government, the will of the government will always be within people. It will never be within AI because AI can't have will. It can only have programming. It can only have a direction. A train can move in any different direction that it's moving, but it can only train is probably not the right description. An airplane or a helicopter can move in any direction within a three-dimensional environment, but that is different from it being able to choose which direction it's going in. And even if we, this is where epistemology comes in, even if we obfuscate our ability, which is why the Turing test is stupid, even if we are able to blind ourselves from observing how that is made and then ascribe sentient to it, that doesn't make it sentient. The Turing test is not an intelligent argument for, and I know the Turing test is more complicated than what I'm saying, but it still basically requires a series of assumptions. One of them that man's ability to observe is theoretically absolute. Threw that away. No, because under no circumstances will that government have direction without the will of the people. If it becomes AI only and the people cease to exist, it's no longer a government because it's by definition not a government. It's just an AI that we've chosen to follow, and then we worship it like the calf, the golden calf. That's
right.
What you'll have. You'll have an idol, but or
you'll have the Borg.
It'll still be. I mean, it'll be morally equivalent as sacrificing kids to a golden calf. It's still the same concept because it's a false god.
Sure.
Now it'll probably whether its aesthetic is more religious or less religious, it'll still be a false god. The government side of it, the fusion of those two, will still be an ontologically the same ontological category as the people, because the people are the only thing within that organization that have will. Therefore, it still is an ontological category. That's my like skin like immediate consumption, because an AI, it doesn't matter how fast, how ungraspable its vastness is still not a human being. Because something that makes humans is will. If you can say that computers can be sentient, then you can say
that was literally my next question was okay, is there a way we could define the AI as having sentience?
Let's just say if it's possible for an AI to have a will of its own, you would have to impose a will upon it. The thing that makes man different from the animals is it has a will. And that is a categorical distinction. So we've held this distinction throughout history. It's a philosophical argument having to do with God created us in the image of Him, but it's also there's something different about mankind. It's not just the Aristotelian intellect. There's more to it. It has to do with will. It's definitional of man that man is will. You cannot create an AI to have something that's definitional to man without eradicating the definition. If AI can be man, genocide is not a sin.
Oh, agreed. Mm-hmm. Right, because again, you know, just assuming everyone into the aether of what is AI, mm-hmm. which you could say on one term is genocide. The mm-hmm. other way you could say that is we've moved to utopia. Look, we've integrated with these things. We'll now live forever. That, by the way, is very interesting. That's Harari's position, is that we're going to integrate with the AI and suddenly we'll live forever. And then the question now is are you really integrated with that?
Yeah, it's also said in Proverbs, a fool says to himself, there is no God.
Right.
It doesn't give him an argument. It doesn't convince him of something. It doesn't go to that man saying, we will live forever. It just, the fool says to himself, there is no God. And maybe this, and for some people it might come across as unconvincing, but there is that line at the end of the Bible, and there's this line that comes that Christians are familiar with, but it still comes to it. And it comes to do with things like moral decisions and our ambiguity and all the difficult challenges that we face in the world. But at the end of the day, every tongue will confess and every knee will bow.
Right.
Some of those knees will only be bowing because the femurs are shattered in their place and there is nothing left of your legs to stand on. Your will be so utterly crushed by the magnificence of God that not kneeling will be non-existent. And so it's not a really good argument for that sense, but it's a conviction that in the end, it doesn't matter how good your argument is if you are wrong in that sense, and so therefore we humble ourselves to that which we can. And it's part of, I think it's something to do with intelligence. Maybe it has to do with the imposter syndrome, but well, let's wrap it up because I never even you know what? I can reference it on, I don't remember which episode it was on, but you were on earlier and you got to talk about your time in the Pentagon when the plane hit.
Yep.
So for those who have made it this far and want to have you want to follow more in the conversation between Beau and I, we're going to have to schedule another call or another conversation whether or not I'm on the road because this has been a fantastic piece. But if you want to get more on it immediately, Beau, you were in the Pentagon when the plane hit on 9/11.
That's correct.
Okay. I hear it every once in a while that people say it wasn't a plane, it was a bomb.
I found out about, just really quickly, I was part of the Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs. I was primarily working as the head of the tour programs. We just have this tour program people could sign up for and get tours inside of the building. Mm-hmm. And crazy enough, we used to walk them in the building, which was like, now that I think about that now, it's like, okay, that's nuts. But that was this program that I was the head of, and we had gone upstairs to watch, and I was standing upstairs, and we saw the second plane hit the building. So there was some news thing, and so people were watching. The other tour guides had these, it was joint service, had Marines and Air Force and Coasties and stuff, and an Army, and somebody comes down like, hey guys, you gotta come see this. So we went up to this upper lounge that had a TV in it, and we're standing there, and one of the trade centers is on fire, and then all of a sudden, the next plane comes and hits. We watched it live, and I remember this one Marine, Lunsford, I think his name was. I just remember him going, "We're going to war." Like I remember, I'm just like that was the first thing that was said by anybody after the second plane hit.
It's that very rolling kind of, "We're going to war."
We're going to war. It was just like that. I mean, just
like my grandfather,
roar, right?
Yeah. My grandfather used to talk that way.
And so we went downstairs because we're like, hey, we're going to cancel the tours for the rest of the day, right? Different stuff because who knows what kind of orders we're going to start getting, right? Mm-hmm. And so we go down to go cancel tours, and another of the tour guides, an Air Force guy, had gone out into the middle of the Pentagon. In the middle of the Pentagon is this little itty bitty building inside the middle of the Pentagon. And curious fun fact, the Soviets used to think that building in the middle was the Pentagon, and the thing around it was a fortress to defend that building.
Oh, I gotta love Soviets. They're great people.
And so it's really a hot dog stand. So in the summertime, it's a convenience store and a hot dog stand. So
we should have gone full kayfabe with that one. And every time you go and you have to do like the special salute to get in to get you, and then they just hand you a hot dog, but it comes back out with a briefcase.
Yeah.
He has the secret documents, and somebody learns the whole dance and then comes out with a bunch of hot dogs. He's like, "What the hell?"
I know. So it's like a hot dog stand in the summertime. Anyway, so he was out there having a cigarette because that's one of the places you can go to smoke. Mm-hmm. Well, when the second plane hit the building, right? Pentagon is big. It's like 17 miles worth of corridor space, and it's mostly solid concrete. And the reason is they didn't use metal to build the building because it was being built during World War II, and they want to save the steel for battleships and stuff like that.
Oh.
So it's a really unique design because of what was happening for World War II. And so the plane came and hit the building, and we're in our office, and the way the building is set up, if he'd have come down into the middle rather than hit the outside wall, he would have come right in my office. So we were right on a straight line from where the aircraft impacted. And so Air Force guy sees it, turns and runs all the way back up through the building. And he runs up, he's all red-faced, full-blown. It's the first time I'd ever really seen somebody full-blown human physiological response to stress, right? Mm-hmm. I'm sure you saw it on guys, right, where they're turning colors and the blood drains out from around the eyes and they're red, like sweating instantaneously, right? Like he was full-blown physiological response to stress. And he comes up and he just rattles off really, really, really fast. I'm like, stop, what? Mm-hmm. Come back here, right? And he comes back and he goes real slow. We've got to get out of here. A plane just hit the Pentagon. And then he turned and he ran away. And I was like, standing there.
Where's he running to?
I'm like, one, where are you going? And like, two, like, dude, like there's people over there, right? And three, it's like, okay, I guess we're at war. And then four, we're all standing there. And these two other NCOs were with me at the time. They were my bosses, and they just stood there looking at each other, and nobody did anything. So I stood there and I waited and I waited and I waited, and finally I went, okay, you go that way and look for this. You go this way and get them. I'm going to go this way and do this other thing. And we left. They never liked me after that because I usurped authority. But I'm like, we're not doing anything here. Let's go.
I had a team leader in Ranger Battalion who eventually got kicked out, and he was an incompetent fool. But that's a little bit of much, and we'll have to tell that story at another time.
So
he didn't. He had the same issue. He was very good at exporting all his problems on other people. And it was funny is that we all knew it, and the platoon knew it as soon as he ND'd his 9mm, the entire battalion turned on him.
Yep, you're
and
done.
It's like, oh yeah, you always were exporting your problems on your privates, but until that happened. It's decorum. We played the rules.
Yeah, it wasn't until another event later on during the recovery phase after 9/11 where those two guys finally got exposed for what was going on.
Uh-huh.
But went running off, and there's a way that the tour goes through the building. And so I was thinking, I had a tour in the building. I knew there was one scheduled, and they would have been in the building at the time. So I went to go look for them. And the two guys that were leading them did the right thing. They all moved, the alarms are going off. They all moved them to a proper exit. They got them going out. Well, then we started making our ways over, and it's a big building, right? But you can get through the corridor. The corridors, there's like a big loop around it. And we went all the way through the corridors to be able to get involved. Well, the top 3 floors, so the big hole in the middle, then the top 2 floors stayed up for about half an hour, 45 minutes. And then eventually the whole thing had collapsed. And lots of smoke and stuff like that. A fair amount of the plane didn't catch on fire, which was really fascinating. I mean, there was jet fuel on the ground and stuff like that, which just reeks. It's just terrible smelling stuff. And one of the people that we managed to pull out as we got him out was an officer, and he stopped breathing. We're doing compressions on him, and you got jet fuel coming out every time you would compress. You do chest compression, you get jet fuel coming out.
He was an officer on the plane?
No, officer in the building, yeah.
And he got hit, he went unconscious and
had consumed some of the jet fuel.
Ooh.
I mean, it was wild. From what I understand, he lived, but it was just complete chaos for a while. All of a sudden, like, ranks stopped meaning things, and like, nobody knew who orders were. It was just people took over as leaders, and stuff started to get done. And so at one point, we were out on the southern side of the building, not the southern side, the western side of the eastern side of the building. So it's like the northeast side. So it's kind of up here, and there's a parking lot up there, and people were trying to go through to leave, right? Whether it was civilians that were working in the Pentagon, and even some military personnel were getting in cars and they were leaving and not staying at the spot. And I was with this one captain, and we were doing medical triage stuff, and I was just coming along holding this crap and helping him work on stuff, right? And captain finally looks up, and there's these 2 MPs standing there, and he's like, stop the cars, rip out the seats, we're taking people to the hospital. And so they did. They would walk out, stop, get out, and they were confiscating people's cars to send injured people to the hospital and stuff like that. And we eventually went back in to try to go make way in the building to go and find stuff. And it was really surreal, being in some of the corridors and stuff, and the firefighters on the outside spraying water in, and there's no drainage in there, so the water keeps rising and stuff like that. The most surreal moment was we were getting ready to go. We had these little groups who would go and spend 5 or 6 minutes, and they have to come back out again, right? Just because they were concerned about smoke and stuff like that, and the gas and the fumes and stuff. And we were in this little group, and we're waiting for our turn to go in, and I look over to the side. Here's these 2 majors, right? Like, one's an Air Force major and one's a Marine Corps major, and they're picking up scraps of paper, and these scraps of paper are all top secret documents, because where the plane had hit was one of the record storage areas. And so there's top secret documents all scattered through these areas, and they're picking them up and they're putting them on this pile. And there's this E4, specialist, U.S. Army specialist, and he's standing at parade rest with his back to the pile because he's got to guard the pile, but he can't look at it. And it was just so bizarre.
You didn't take one and put it in your pocket?
No. I was just like, this is so bizarre. Like, it was just so wild. And, we eventually got the day ended wasn't what we could do because the roof, collapsed and stuff like that. I know there's a lot of people that go around with the different conspiracies and all that kind of stuff about it. There's a bunch of different elements that people don't understand. One is the design of the buildings. The place that it hit was a place that had just been redesigned for bomb mitigation.
Yep.
So it was done after what happened in Oklahoma City, because that's the part of the building that's literally the closest to the highway, easy to pull off, have a bomb go off.
Yep.
So that place had just been redone. The whole building is literally it's thick feet of concrete, right? And so the whole thing just gets folded into that hole. I mean, it's just the wildest thing. And then, there was no fire. No. There's a fire truck right next to where the plane got in, that when the thing went in and had an explosion, it burned the fire truck to the ground. Part of the reason it took so long for us to eventually have something go in was it burned the fire truck to the ground because it came in right over the top of the helicopter pad. And then there are videos that exist. Okay. I'm going to say something that I haven't told a lot of people about in a long period of time, and I don't know that people are going to believe me, and it's okay. So being part of the tour guide program, we got to meet a lot of different people doing a lot of different things. And so we met a lot of the civilians in there and stuff like that. What a lot of people don't know is that there was actually an entire team of FBI that existed in the Pentagon. And the team in the FBI that exists in the Pentagon is there for counterintelligence purposes, right? So they're trying to identify spies. And sometimes they'd be watching things like who was coming in for tours and things like that. And we would get warnings as the tour guide program, hey, this person doesn't come out of your sight. Okay. Or all of a sudden we'd be walking down the hall and whoop, here came this guy that we knew was part of the FBI, be walking with us with the tour. And I'd gotten to be friends with one of the guys that was the FBI liaison there. So there's a camera above where the plane impacted. And I only got to see a snippet of the footage. But you can see the pilot in the window as the plane's coming in. Like, you can see him in the face. And so it's really a terrifying bit of footage. And the camera was really active until it melted and fell off. I don't know why that footage has never been released. But that footage is there. The other one that people don't go and show when they talk about it, was it a plane, was it a missile? So there's light posts along the highway, because that's a big major highway that it crosses over. So it goes right over the top of Arlington Cemetery, and then it goes down the hill, and then there's the Pentagon. And I was ventured to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and one of the guys that was my trainers as a tomb sentinel was the guy on the mat when the plane flew over the top. And it flew really close to the tomb as it came over on 9/11. They obviously didn't know what was going on. So he's on the plaza as the plane goes really close. And he's like, man, that was way close. What was that? And heard the bang when it hit. And so that guy ended up being my trainer. And there's light posts. And one of the things that was just the most surreal thing, again, I wish I had cell phone in time to take a picture so I could have kept it. But as the plane came in, he didn't come in flat. He was tipping as he was coming in. So it had one wing down and one wing was up.
And that wing is ding, 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 ding.
It's shearing off the light posts. And so you can see like the 2 or 3 light posts on the way in that he'd sheared off with the wing as he came through.
Because they're distinctly age different. Yeah, the challenge that I have, and this is where we're going to leave off, and I think when we started with the question and we never get to finish it, is if true, then what? Right. If your conspiracy theory, and you said this to me like 10 years ago now. Let's see, it's 2023, basically 10 years ago, almost to the day.
Yep. Because
we were talking about, kind of the stuff. This is before he got censored. Not really about him itself, but there were certain things going on at the time. It was 2023. We were talking, this is 2013. The Obama gun scare was going on. And this was kind of like in my history, in my memory, 2022 into 2023 was a very distinct chapter shift in the United States. Mm-hmm. Not only was I getting out of the military, which has a lot of impressions on me as an individual, but distrust went from passive to active. Mm-hmm. And it was like, yeah, that was the last time they're not coming for your guns could have mattered, right? Yep. And that was and that spread to different things. But the problem that we were running into is this is, at that time there was this big idea. This is before Epstein. But whether or not it's, whether we're data points, 2013 gun confiscation attempt by Obama. rise of militias in 2020 or 2013 in order to stop it, backpedaling, Alex Jones, Sex Ring Island, peddling, Matrix, Pizzagate, Sound of Freedom, Epstein, so on and so forth. So like this whole network, these are the events that have defined the last 10 years of our lives. Literally, Epstein, confiscation, Trump, whatever, right?
Yep. COVID
now. So the problem that I have with conspiracies, the idea of what when someone prevents a theory, an argument, an explanation, maybe even a metaphysic or a worldview, and they try to make an argument about the government's lying, the world was invented, whatever. The question that always burns up is, if true, then what?
Right.
And the answer, the thing that I find distasteful is, well, you just have to believe.
Yeah, that's a challenge.
Yep, it's the same thing with it almost becomes, that's where the Gnosticism comes in. That's where like the religiosity comes into it.
Right.
But we do not have time to get into that. We will schedule another one.
The one last piece to add to what you're saying there is, what do you like? What if then if so then what? Right. So there's a really great documentary series. If people haven't watched it, it's totally worth your time to either find it, borrow it, buy it, whatever you got to do. It's The World at War from the Imperial War Museum, 1973. And it's all about what happened in World War II. It's a massive television documentary series. It's got to be 40 or 50 hours long. It's huge. Ooh. And what's really great about it is everybody that's in the thing, when they're talking about different things, they'll go and talk to people who are directly involved. So as an example, at one point they go and they want to talk about the Wolfpack strategy in the North Atlantic. So they go and they interview Karl Dönitz, who's the general under the Nazis who invented the tactic. And he just like, this is what we did. This is why we did it. Well, at one point it's the first episode. I think the first episode, honestly, is, in my opinion, is probably the most interesting of all of the different episodes. They're talking with different Germans about how their government had started to change, right? This sudden direction. And really, Tim Pool's talked about before, we see history now as like, haha, it happened. No, it was a decade, right? Just finished reading William Schreier's book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. It's like, I was listening to it. It's like 80 hours long. It's just massive. But the gist of it is eventually they're talking to these different Germans and they're like, why didn't you do something? Why didn't you do something? And this is, so one is this incrementalism. They're just moving along bit by bit by bit. Two is the idea of the mass formation psychosis. But there was this one guy and he goes, so that's a really interesting question, he says. So if I decide to go and do something to stop Hitler, well, I'm a terrorist. Mm-hmm. But if I wait too long, now I'm dealing with a totalitarian governmental system that can just destroy me and everyone around me. Mm-hmm. And that got me thinking for a really long time, right? Is okay, if 9/11's an inside job, everything's all there, whatever
Can I add a line real quick?
Yeah, please.
When he says that like I'm a terrorist, he's not saying I will be labeled a terrorist. He's saying I'm actually doing terrorism.
You're engaging in some form of terrorism.
Yeah, which from a moral standpoint is, I know that's wrong. In other words, I cannot do that which is wrong to produce that which is right.
Right.
Okay.
The other portion of it is the other portion. I think you say both. You could say one, I'll be labeled it, but two, I'll actually have engaged.
Yeah, but if
terrorism.
I could go back in time and kill Hitler as a baby, would it be moral or immoral? It's the same question. It's the same ethical question, because the answer is, well, he hasn't technically done
anything yet.
However, your timeline.
Right.
Same question. Got it.
So, if all of this was some conspiracy where they're killing everybody, right? Just like, my challenge with the idea that COVID was done on purpose and stuff like that. I'm not saying that it wasn't. My guess is it was a terrible mistake, and everybody's trying to cover their asses every way they can.
Yep, sure. There's a willing and an unwilling participation.
And I think that there's an element to that occurred within some elements of 9/11. When we have some of the audio of people going, gosh, what should I do? There's a plane in the air. Should I shoot it down? Gosh, what should I do? Right? Mm-hmm. Okay, massive F up across the board, right? Mm-hmm. Huge intelligence failures and everything. All of that being the case, though, again, what do you do about it, right? Because if we go and we say, oh, you murdered all of us on 9/11, you definitely did it. Let's go and storm the Capitol on January 6th or something, right? Mm-hmm. Like this, it's, the question is, what do we do about it? And this is, again, the problem with the distrust, is once the distrust reaches that epidemic level, what do you do about it becomes even harder. Yeah, because you can't even trust for a solution.
You can't even use somebody as a backboard. Right. And that's why the solution is decentralization and community building, which is humble yourself, get to know other people, we'll do it together. So, well, Beau, I think that actually makes a good wrapping up conversation here. It's Jack Posobiec who says, where are your digits, where are your coordinates? Where do people find you? Where do we go from here?
DefensiveMindsetTraining.com, Defender University, and DMT Defenders on Instagram.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much. Let's close this quickly. For those who are still listening, you can head over to redactedllc.com. That's where you're going to find, if this goes out in time, which this one might, but we'll just keep it open till August 1st then. But that's where you can find our merch and our hoodies and our pre-orders and stuff. And then in addition to that, it's redactedculture.locals.com is our Patreon alternative, because I hate getting censored in that same fashion. Discussions happen there. So, Beau, I know we got to wrap up quick. You got places to be. I got places to be. Thank you much for this conversation.
That's so awesome.
I've really enjoyed it. We'll talk to you soon. So.
Yeah, thank you, man.
All right. That's it. Let's go forth and conquer.